Welcome back to another episode of Starbase Weekly. This is Mauricio, and this is episode 70, I believe. And Indian Star, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, 70 is absolutely correct. Hello, everybody. I'm Indian Star. Welcome to our 70th edition of Starbase Weekly. And this time we have two flyover photos to show you and ground photos. Thomas?
Thank you. It's going to be amazing. I'm going to be driving today, and there's been so much happening this week. We have to go over a lot of things. We had, as you mentioned, two flyovers, ground photos, and a whole lot to talk about. So throwing it over to Zach now.
Well, hello, everybody. Glad to be with you all. We finally got this first orbital flight test out of the way. So, 2 years of waiting is finally over. And now we get to examine everything as far as, what actually went down during the launch and what happened afterwards. So I'm really excited to go through all of this today.
I'm excited too.
So one thing to kind of mention is we're going to change up the order of things a little bit. Zach, you're still over at around the Brownsville area, right?
I'm in South Padre Island. Yeah, so I'm in South Padre Island still right now, and probably will be leaving about halfway through the show because I need to start my drive back to Chicago. But yeah, it's been about a little over a week since I got down here, and it's definitely time to hit the road.
You sound as tired as I am. I've been going through like Mach 5 with my hair on fire, trying to go through all the details of everything that's been happening this week because it's just been so wild. For those of you who didn't know, we did have the first orbital test flight. So things changed quite dramatically in a lot of good ways and other ways that it's going to be interesting, to say the least, coming up in the future here. I'm going to go ahead and switch through and start through the actual live stream that SpaceX had here. That's probably a good place to start off. Let me go ahead and turn those off. So first off, this is something that was interesting. I was talking with you during the live stream that they basically was at T minus 15 to 12 minutes or something like that, they mentioned something interesting, and I've got the audio going on here, so make sure we have this going all the way through. But John Innsbrucker mentioned something very interesting, which was that I believe that the quote would be, unlatch the hold down clamp. So I'm going to go ahead and play that.
For T0, and we're also configuring the launch pad for liftoff. The booster hold downs have been unlatched. They'll be ready to retract at liftoff.
Okay, so that was the main statement. That was the important one. That depending on what your lingual senses tell you, there's like two ways it could go, though. Either the booster hold downs are unlatched, meaning there's a pin system, or they are literally retracting the hold downs at this point. As far as the clamps that hold it down, what is your impression, Zach? I'm really curious on this.
That was one of the more interesting things. I actually heard about it before they said it on the stream, and I had a hard time believing it, that they would release the clamps about 15 minutes before liftoff, which is very interesting. But I guess it also kind of makes sense in a lot of ways. So you are essentially reducing your points of failure by at least 20. Having even a single one of those clamps not release at the moment of ignition would be a bad thing. So, having them all released early, and, being able to, just rely on essentially the weight of the booster and the ship to keep themselves stable on top of the clamps. So it's very, very interesting. At that point, the only thing really providing any stability at all would be, I guess, the booster QD and the ship QD, but they're not really supposed to be like structural supports, I would say. But yeah, I thought that was definitely super interesting. What did you think about it?
Well, I'm trying to find the visual, because I remember there was something specific to this that Ryan Hansen had. He's got some great art on this particular subject, but one of those was that there's a couple of pieces that they used to have that were basically put on the left and the right of the hold down clamp, so it would never be able to release. So in the center, there's this little hydraulic actuator that pushes up on the clamp itself, and that will basically prevent it from being able to move at all. That's basically meant for static fires and that kind of situation. And I think they may have moved to something else that is just a pin system that pulls it out. So now it's able to actuate once it's been moved. So it's basically in a locked state to now an active state that you can retract it. And once that's been pulled out, it's confirmed, and then they can go ahead and basically start up the engines, and it holds on to it, but it's not able to hold the full thrust of, let's say, when it's at 1.6 thrust weight ratio or something like that. There's going to be a set limit. Maybe it's even 1.1 that it will release once it hits that. So I'm going to go
release as far as the actually jumping off of the clamps.
Yeah, I think it's just that the clamps hold it down, give it some pressure up until a certain point. So a thrust to rate ratio of 1-to-1 would be just, a hover. It's not going to be able to move upwards. The clamps would not even be really necessary at that point, but it'd be good to have them because you don't want it to be shaking up and down. And it's a question of, like, do you have all your engines ignited, especially those outer 20? So they were also explaining in the video one other useful piece of information, that they stage it in like 3 sections. So they turn on the engines at T-6 seconds is when they're basically all on. But I'll go ahead and actually move basically all the way down to the T- count here, and then start that up as well. But we'll go through the other details. 4, 3. Okay, so pretty much at T-4 4.5 to 5 seconds is when it's lifting off. So it's staged all of the 33 engines to basically turn on in 3 different groups, and it's staggered, so that way you don't have such a massive shock. So there was a great article specifically from an individual who works with NASA. I can't remember his name all of a sudden. I have to pull it up, but he was specifically talking about how the initial engine start is pretty much like an overpressure event, because you are creating a large amount of force, and it's basically going to be reverbing around everywhere. So that's going to be an issue. And that's, I think, partly why they're staggering the engines. Instead of basically doing it all at once, would basically be like a bomb, and things are going to really have a hard time working with that amount of thrust. But the one thing that we see here that really changes the whole dynamics is watching this. Like, you'll see this little something here, maybe that's just smoke, but there's massive amounts of debris that will be kicked up during the launch. That's something nobody was quite expecting the scope, scale, or size of. So you can see one right there. So I'll just play that again without the mouse jumping around there, but you can see these things moving around. One of them seems to basically go at the same rate as the LOX tank is right here. So kind of watch in this area, but there's also these pieces already up there.
Feel free to mute your stream.
Mute my stream?
Yeah, I think we've
Okay.
heard the cheering and everything.
Okay. Yeah, so here we go. There's just massive chunks going everywhere. Very exciting at the time, obviously, but nobody really saw that until that point. And you see basically normal venting out of the side of the booster. That's nothing new.
Before you get too far, those chunks went really high. They cleared the tower, some of those pieces. The height of the tower.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
The smaller ones. Yeah.
They didn't look so small. I mean, we could still see them in the video.
They're like the size of bowling balls or briefcases or something like that. They were huge for some of those, but those were the smaller ones. And I have to kind of put those in air quotes because the size of the other chunks were like school buses in size.
Agreed.
They were huge.
The one that went across the freeway is gigantic.
Yeah. So one other thing that we see here coming up is we have basically engines starting to go off and explode a bit here, as well as the first HPU unit goes. So it dies. It's no longer active, but it still has a second hydraulic power unit. And those are used to do the thrust vector control for all of the 13 engines. At least that's my interpretation of what I've seen and all the details. And there goes another engine. So it started off, they had three missing engines. And then they just lose up to about 8 here throughout the whole flight. I'm going to go ahead and skip a little bit further into it. Because right about here, or just after this, at about T plus 2 minutes and 5 seconds, we start losing the second HPU unit as well, I believe. This is where the vehicle starts to lose control. And from what my understanding, the particular hydraulic units basically just will be in a neutral state if they don't get any input. And so they're basically still on the same course that they were before on those engines, but things aren't quite working out right. You can see that the booster has already made a swift right turn, and it's losing speed very rapidly. So that was not a good sign at that point. But the issue that it seems to be is not specifically, in my opinion, this is just one of those things where everybody's going to have their own view on this. I think a lot of the issue is due to the FOD, that concrete that they kicked up. So Zach, what was your opinion on where a lot of the root cause, or at least the issues that you saw? What were your opinions on that?
Yeah, I would say that that's probably a fair statement to make. I mean, it seems like had they not had those issues with all of the debris flying up in the air and actually striking the vehicle, that it probably would have at least gotten through all the way to stage separation, and performed a lot better. And yeah, I mean, that's kind of unfortunate because while they did get a lot of data, specifically for the booster and a lot of data from stage 0, I feel like they didn't get that much for the actual Starship itself, other than, there's a lot of structural information that they probably got out of this. But yeah, I mean, that is unfortunate to not reach that point where you actually to perform stage separation and second stage ignition. So yeah, I mean, I would say that, it's kind of surprising in a lot of ways, because, I mean, number one, it's surprising that they didn't necessarily expect any of that stuff to happen. And, I guess Elon's comments on that kind of speak for themselves, as far as, initially believing that they would be able to get away with using the Fondag for a single launch. And I don't know. I mean, it's really interesting the way that went down. It seems almost like the pad was previously damaged from the 31 engine static fire test, and maybe they didn't fully realize, or micro fractures and stuff like that, it was already weakened or something like that. And then, when they actually, launched, you're already launching on a damaged surface, essentially. So I don't know. I wonder if it would have went better if they had to replace the Fondag pad again after the 31 engine static fire test.
I'm kind of in the opinion that it wouldn't have mattered. So the biggest issue is they were at like 49% thrust for that 31 engine static fire. So what we had for that test versus the real life, the like high thrust, massive number of engines. So we lost 3, so at least 30 of the engines were igniting, and they were, from my calculations, about 80% of the thrust. So a couple of things I went through and measured was from the first time it lurches off the pad to it passing this part of the tower up here, it's about 12 seconds. So what you get overall, and I'm talking about the bottom of or the base of the booster, that's where I'm measuring it, that once it passes and clears that tower, you're looking at basically a thrust to weight ratio of on average about 1.16, which is really far from the 1.6 that it should be. And the thrust for the remaining engines seems to be about 80%. My math might be wrong on that, but it's, what I was able to go through and figure out based off of just the simple physics of the thing. And so if that's the case, like, I wonder if they just basically sitting there for too long, as well as the massive amount of force that they're putting on that concrete pad, just obliterate. So it's pressure, it's some heat, but it's a lot of vibration, and it's time. So those 3 factors really, I think, just destroyed that pad. Yeah, every time I see that, it's hard, because once you've seen, I saw that at the beginning of the launch, and I was just like, oh my gosh, was that parts of the table? What was that? Was that the burn plates? I had no clue. But we did go through and get some interesting views of the rocket during launch, and you could see that the engines were out in multiple places, and they had a really great chart for that. But the other part of it was, it's not loaded. That's really strange. Like, this is actually when the FTS goes off, so actually I should jump a little bit back before I get to the next part. So we'll get to the destruction pad of the pad here in just a little bit. The FTS was actually another interesting part. I have to find probably EDA's video that would describe this better. I'm not sure if we can show that. Zach, what do you know on that video that he's shown? Have you seen that?
I have seen it. I mean, it was an interesting video. It almost looked like the engine bells on all the engines that were out were just completely gone. Like,
Yeah.
what was that?
Yeah, I was just going to say that, like, at the time of explosion, from his view, his perspective, it was much more clear than SpaceX's, at least from this angle. And what you see is, you can kind of see it barely right here, but it starts from the engines and works its way up the booster. And then either the booster's FTS goes off or it just goes out the vents for the explosion. But you pretty much end up with the booster going first, then the ship. That's the FTS going off on the ship. This is just moments beforehand. So this is before the FTS goes off on the ship, and here's the booster. Or not. This might not be the booster. This is just the cloud left over from the booster. I thought this was the shadow of it. Could be even the shadow of the ship. I'm not even sure. But these are the pieces of the debris from the booster. But the FTS, when you're watching it here, it didn't go off earlier. It went off just right at this point, at least on the ship. The booster goes off first, and then the ship goes off. So that's one thing that should be clarified. So you see venting off the vehicle, and that's pretty typical. But one issue that they're having is at the point where it starts moving around quite a bit here earlier on, you'll still see this venting. That is not the FTS gone off yet. It would basically be such a massive hole that rips open everything that you either do one of two things. You vent off into a large cloud, or you explode into a large cloud, and we basically see that with both of these. So the FTS is not gone off quite yet, is what I've been able to figure out on this.
I've seen some suggestions that, that it was that the FTS had gone off early, and then, that was the tanks leaking for a little bit right there before they depressurized. I think that's a dangerous suggestion to make, because that's basically saying that the FTS didn't do its job, because that's not how they're designed to work. They're not designed to depressurize a tank. They're designed to completely rupture both of them and join the two tanks together. So essentially, you already have an explosion going from the actual detonation itself, and then you're instantly combining the two tanks while that explosion is happening. So it should immediately explode all the time. I don't get the way they're placed. It's not meant to just rupture a single tank.
Yeah, it's it is right on that common dome, and if you rupture that common dome and you have a bit of heat, it wants to ignite it as well. But let's say if it just cools it down. Oh, okay. Well, you've now just ruptured a tank that's at around at least 6 bar of pressure or more. It wants to unzip that whole vehicle, especially at those speeds that it's going still. It's not like it's just hovering. It's actually got pressure behind it, and it's got forces of the wind. It's going to go everywhere, and you can see that it does when it ruptures here. So that's just something to clarify that it does work. The FTS system went off, at least on the ship. The booster, it may have actually not gone off until it was halfway exploded. It's hard to tell. I can only show you with, let's say, EDA's view, but show that here. Let's see here.
So I have a question.
While you're
yeah.
gathering that,
Go ahead,
go
Zach.
for it.
Zach, you were going to say something?
I was just saying, while you're gathering that, I do believe this is the most people we've ever had on our Sunday streams, or I guess the Starbase Weekly streams altogether. So really want to say thank you for all of you being here. And if you guys could do us a favor and hit that like button, that would be really awesome. We appreciate all of you. And we have a ton of other stuff to cover as we keep going through this. And hopefully you guys will see that Mauricio did a ton of work this week to try and get all of these images that he got. And we'll have some stories about that as we go.
Yeah.
Yeah, hit that like button and just help us out by, helping us out with that algorithm.
But yeah, this is just such an incredible view. So this is one that SpaceX released to somebody. I don't know why they were doing this, but it seemed like they were releasing it out, these just pieces and chunks of interesting material out in all of these different directions. But yeah, this is the result. This is one of a few images we have of what happened to the launch table and just the infrastructure underneath. So this one's not the best view. I went through and got a thumbnail view and blew it up so that I could get a little bit better resolution out of it, but it's not quite real details. It just gets you a better view. But this one is really detailed.
This one is amazingly crazy. Look, everything from underneath is gone.
Yeah. The section right here, I think, is the worst of it. So one thing I noticed is there's a triangle piece that's it's basically a wedge piece, I guess you could say, that has been removed from the column. So these columns right here are about 140 feet deep for each of these columns. There's 6 of them for each of the legs. And yeah, that's the hardest part about looking at all of this, is looking at this launch infrastructure and seeing the destruction that this has caused from the booster at liftoff. And so that was basically between 2 and the 12 seconds that it was launching, that this started just getting eroded and being destroyed, and then you started seeing the concrete chunks just flying up.
And according to Elon, he thinks that it shattered the concrete, not just simply eroded it.
Yeah. So he, let me see if I can bring up these particular tweets here.
They're in the, you see them?
Yep.
Okay.
Pulling that up. But here's a quick comparison that Mauricio has made. So this was what the infrastructure used to look like. This was the compression ring that you would have for concrete and rebar. So the rebar is supposed to be under tension, and the concrete would basically be compression. So now we no longer have the concrete here, so you no longer have compression on this part. And the other side of that is that you have probably damaged the rebar to the point where you need to cut off all the rebar up to both ends and actually access a little bit more, a little bit deeper. But it's still probably salvageable. I mean, that's the good news, is that you can go through and connect all this back together, put in new rebar. You basically have to do new forms like these. You might go through and do some extra stuff to the current concrete to help reinforce that as well. So put in embeds and additional rebar surrounding it. And then afterwards, I'm hoping that they will put steel plates around these parts, because the compression ring is, this compression ring as well as the legs are the most critical part of infrastructure, that it's supposed to be buried. But in this case, just because it's buried doesn't mean it's not accessible to the booster. But yeah, so, that was not the tweet. That was just his whole bit of information there. But his tweet does talk a bit about, it says here, 3 months ago, we started building a massive water-cooled steel plate to go underneath the launch mount. This is that steel plate. That's the system we're looking at, is those pieces will be going with that. So these were, as far as we can tell, would be part of that water deluge system. So they're water cooled, and they're kind of like the burn plates. Yeah. Yes, Maurice. Yeah, Zach.
Oh, I was just saying if you could zoom in, because it's looking really tiny on the screen.
Good point. Yeah. So these would be.
Sorry, Thomas. These are the same pieces that are on top of the OLM?
No, they're not the same, but they're similar in their potential function, that we've talked about, that we'd be doing something like this on the top. And Zach, you've talked to Elon on Twitter Spaces and on Twitter about this. What's your impressions?
Well, I think this is a rather interesting thing. I mean, it's kind of sad to me a little bit, just because, as he said, that they, I guess, felt like they didn't have time to do this. But I don't know. I mean, it seems like that's, I mean, obviously a decision that they made instead of, actually being forced to do it, because, I feel like they really wanted to just launch on a certain day and like no matter what. But I don't know. I mean, I feel like the Stage Zero team probably wishes that they were able to get this stuff in before that happened, because it would have been, I mean, I don't know if it would have prevented it entirely, but I feel like it would have done significantly better. By having these in there, I mean, I guess if you just look at the legs of the launch mount and then the top deck of the launch mount, they all look very fine. And so, with that being said, I feel like these steel plates probably have a better chance, much better chance than the Fondag pad that they had in the center there. But, getting this system in place probably would have taken at least 3 to 4 months, if not longer. So, I mean, I get that, but it's going to be interesting when they actually get this done, to see how it actually looks, how it works. And I mean, to some degree, the booster has already helped them out with some of that excavation work, which, man, it's just so many thoughts on that altogether. But yeah, I mean, I think this will be an interesting solution. Originally we thought this was all just related to water deluge, but now it makes sense that it's an entire, basically a water cooled jacket essentially for the base.
Yeah, the entire area of the pad, it wasn't just this area of the base, it was just the entire pad. So one thing that we're kind of looking at as a question is, if this is what it does just under the base and it's ripping out the concrete. So the other thing is that the pressure is going down and eating underneath basically the soil and ejecting it everywhere. It's here, it's everywhere. It's even over probably to Port Isabel. There is rumors of some dust over there. I think EDA from Tim was getting some dust on him, so he had to go back inside during the stream. But like, that was quite a weird revelation of what, oh, they got dust over there. And I guess it makes sense. You get the Sahara storms that are away from Africa that dump dust here anyways. But the main point was that a lot of this debris just got put everywhere. You can see concrete, at least in this photo, all over the place. We'll actually go into a little bit more of that. But
Being
wow.
the plates.
Say that again?
Are you showing a different photo right now? I'm still seeing the deluge plates.
Oh, yes, I did, and I forgot I need to share my screen, not the window. Thank you for pointing that out.
It's because we're a team, Thomas.
He's
We're all
showing
here for you.
Mauricio photos. Well, we're all here for the
we
content.
should tell a story about this. We should tell a story about this, because this was a difficult day. So, Mauricio and I were both watching this from Rocket Ranch, which was well within the exclusion zone, I feel like. Still wondering if that was a good idea to watch there, even though everything went fine. But yeah, so immediately after the launch, we went to head to the airport, and the weather wasn't the greatest when we even got near in the first place. But we were told that that there was some gaps in the clouds above Starbase, so we decided to do that and just go there anyways. By the time we got there, the gap had closed significantly, so you can see these first images where you can actually see the full build site. But then by the time we got over to the launch site, the clouds had moved over, and I wish I had some. I didn't take any pictures of it, but I wish I could show you guys what it looked like as Mauricio was trying to shoot through those clouds. I mean, it was like I don't even know, like a sniper trying to hit something that's behind a bush or something. I don't even know. It was pretty intense. We were both just sitting there staring at these clouds, not even really 100% sure where the launch site was. And then you just catch a glimpse of it, and we're like, hey man, it's right there. And you try and snap an image, and this is all you get. But great job on being able to capture as much as you were able to, Mauricio, because that was definitely a tough one.
And to his credit, as always, he caught some amazing shots through the clouds. I mean, like rare shots that show a lot of information.
Yeah, there is so much information here. Even though you're looking at it, looks kind of normal, except for around the launch pad, it's anything but.
And pushed up against the barrier, the berm.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when you kind of look in and zoom in on things, you go, oh, that used to be square HESCO barriers that are now just all over the place. So things have shifted dramatically.
Before we get too deep into it, Mauricio, did you have anything you wanted to add on that? Because that was just my experience from the back seat.
Yeah, it was definitely a difficult flight. I would have to put it up there with, yeah, this is by far the most difficult flight just because of the weather issues that we were encountering. And we weren't going to do this flight, but we had the donations and the support from the community to do multiple flights during the week. And I want to thank everybody for allowing us to do this. That's the only reason we were able to do 2 flyovers. So we did a flyover on the scrub on Monday, right after they took off the TFR. Me and Zach and Felix went off to the airport, and we did the first flyover. That was I couldn't have asked for better weather for that particular flyover. As you can see, there's very little haze in the atmosphere, and pretty good images that particular day. Now, on when was the launch? On Thursday,
20th.
And it was extremely difficult to get this done. And I was pretty upset with on the airplane when I took the images, because I honestly didn't think I had caught anything as I was reviewing the photos. But once I got back, I managed to notice that I did get a couple of things, so it was, I want to thank everybody for allowing me to do that. And we do have another flight scheduled once this weather clears up a bit. We don't have forecast doesn't look too good. So, but yeah, we're going to go out there and capture better images of the aftermath every single week of what's happening out there. So thank you very much for that.
I like your
The
modesty.
more expensive flyovers as well too. I'm guessing that was one of the more expensive flyovers as well too, because we were sitting there orbiting for so long. I mean, I think we were up there for a solid 2 hours this time.
Yeah, for sure. What I was thinking when I was up there, I was actually waiting for the clouds to move. So I was kind of just hanging out, looking at what the clouds are doing. And after a while, I noticed that they weren't really doing anything. The clouds just kept on coming through. But it was a fun flyover. I'm glad that I spent it with you. We had a good time. And yeah, I also got to watch it with you as well there at the location that we're at. So it was fun times.
Yeah, it's thanks for everybody last week as well who helped donated to be able to do 2 flights that week, and also help out the pilot and everything else. This was just fantastic.
Beyond
to be able to get these. Yeah.
Hopefully the weather will cooperate next time.
But we did actually get good pictures out of it. I mean, they're not the clearest and the best pictures, but there's a lot of details in these pictures that helps describe, the destruction that the booster has wrought upon the launch infrastructure here, especially below. And like you can see these little pieces right here, these are supposed to be vertical columns that help hold down the pad. And they've got like a single piece of rebar that sticks up, and we could actually probably see these here at the ground photos as well. So I could probably jump into those as well right here. You might be able to see them, but yeah, it was bad. So you could see that the what we referred to as the doghouse got lifted up on the back. The structure itself seems to be, as far as the foundation, like it might be compromised, but it's still strong. It's still where it's supposed to be. I haven't seen any signs of settling or other issues. So like the doghouse was the first thing that made me worry, is like, is this at the same level as everything else? And it is. It's really the doghouse that got lifted up. The concrete columns below. They're keeping up the entire structure. That's what they're supposed to do, and it's just there is a compromised structure over at the left-hand side. And again, it's really visible from these shots from SpaceX that show just how much destruction has come along. Like I see the water pipe right there, and that just goes crazy to me. That how much it's like this one's broken, but most of it's actually still there.
Say they got extremely lucky because of number one, they almost got unlucky because of the direction it decided to erode. Like if it would have went one of the other directions, it probably wouldn't have done as much damage. Like they got super lucky here because they eroded away all the way underneath the LOX and methane supply pipes, and by some miracle, they didn't rupture. And that was something I've actually discussed in my most recent episode, was that, they had new valves that they placed in there to essentially protect against, like an explosion that would propagate all the way back to the tank farm. And this happened after that valve, or I guess before that valve. So, had something happen where one of those pipes got ruptured, there would have been nothing really to stop that explosion from going all the way back to the tank farm.
You basically have this basically catching either on fire and just going through and rupturing all the way down the pipe because it's right next to the other lines. That's one direction it goes, or it just continues all the way down. It depends on how much basically gaseous oxygen is in there. It can be very bad, especially for the gaseous methane, and if there's any oxygen mixture in it.
So I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
See how the little door is blown out on the right-hand side when we're on the right? Yeah. Does that mean that there was potentially buildup or fire or something that came down and blew the door out? Because if you look at the close-up of that piece that's on the inside, it looks a little charred. It looks a little brutalized. It looks like it took a beating.
I do think it has something more to do with the open part of the top of it. Because you could see that the blast was going this direction. It may be that it just popped out at the pressure at this point, or it could be that the Raptors licked the side of this leg when it was lifting off, and it just popped it off. It just pulled it off, basically. It's hard to tell, but I don't see any scorch marks around it or anything like that to indicate that it exploded. For certain that the ground was exploding everywhere. It could even be just concrete came just smashing down and was removed, just basically removed this element. That's something you kind of will see as a common theme as some of the destruction here. All the destruction, I'll preface this, is that all the destruction seems to be mostly localized here. That was very critical of nature in nature. The rest of it is actually pretty good. Like the integration tower, the rest of the fuel farm was mostly unscathed, but there was still some big dents and things that we can point out.
Projectile holes.
One hole.
No, several on the tanks.
Several?
Yeah, it looks like a drive-by.
Oh dear. I was say it wasn't as bad, but there are things like this where that's concrete and heat, and it didn't do so well.
And it got pummeled. It looks like it melted, but it's pummeled.
Yeah.
I think that there's a good possibility that the Drawworks is heavily damaged.
Yes.
If you look at those images that show, I guess, a little bit more. Okay. Yes. So you can see that that panel on the left side is kind of peeled back. So essentially one of those, this looks like somebody took a shotgun and just like with buckshot and just shot the side of this thing. But you could tell that two of the projectiles that went through, one of them hit the brown plate and then the other one hit the black plate. And that means that all the other ones hit somewhere else inside. And the largest hole that we're seeing there, I don't think, the two big holes, I don't think those are the ones that hit the sidewalls. I think if if you actually go up a little bit.
I'm just looking at these little ones. There's just additional ones that are the smaller ones that made it through and hit the plate from the inside, and they buckled it. They were going over 300 miles an hour for these blocks of concrete. Like, this is the size of a bowling ball.
And the one right there on the left is actually an imprint of the concrete. Do you see it? Upside down?
This one right here?
No, on the left, a little bit catacorner to that.
Oh, this one?
Nope, to the right. It's actually on that
one.
No, it's okay. Don't worry.
Okay.
It's not actually a hole. It's just an imprint on that of a piece.
Oh, these indents.
Sure, but to the left. But that's okay. Just where?
Like
yes,
that right there.
That's the one I'm talking about.
Oh yeah, the rebar. Yes, I see what you mean. It has the imprint of the rebar as it hit.
Yeah, and it didn't go through, but it left that imprint.
Well, I mean, here's the scary part is this is the size right here of rebar. And I'm just wondering, like, is there just rebar flung in here?
Well,
because it's like an arrow at that point. If it goes through, you could basically be seeing, imprints potentially over here from rebar or, I mean, I'm seeing all sorts of stuff here that doesn't belong right there. There's concrete and rocks and all these pieces there. So it bounced around.
We don't have a picture of the other side of this, correct? We don't know if the projectiles potentially went straight through and through the Drawworks through the other end.
Well, this other end over here is open, so it would have basically, if we have any pictures of that.
So we talked about that though, because you can see the sunlight in the top there. You said that was not normal.
That's not normal for sure.
So that's the other side, is it not?
So you can see this other side because it is open. It's open to the air. It's not enclosed like the rest of this is. It's this plate right here should have been reinforced either with concrete. So the concrete, even though it's spalded and looking terrible here, it's relatively intact. I mean, you've had concrete chunks hitting this, taking off pieces, but it's relatively intact. The real solution would have been either a steel plate to cover this to be stronger than this, and we already knew that this was weak before the launch, because during the 31 engine static fire, it just got pulverized and you could see all of it flexing in, and it already had some smaller holes, not like this, nothing like this, but it was obvious that it wasn't going to be a suitable option to do for the launch. And I guess they decided that it was worth the risk, but the Drawworks is the risk that they take. So that's the piece that holds up the chopsticks. It's the part that moves the ship and the booster and has the function of being like almost like a forklift. That's the best description. It's a crane kind of mechanism, but it's really like a forklift that has two forks that spread in and out. But the amount of damage here is pretty bad, and you can actually see inside of the these holes, and it's like at least you don't see destroyed content in there, but it's hard to gauge what's going on in there.
I mean, the good news is that the Drawworks is more than likely. I mean, even if it is damaged, I can't remember if the brakes are on the side or if it's or if the winch is on the side. But either way, I mean, it should have two sets of brakes, right? So even if one is compromised, it should have been able to keep itself in position, which is what it's doing right now. But I would not be surprised if we don't see the chopsticks come down from the top of the tower for a very long time. But that's actually interesting because I wonder, in order to do maintenance on this, you got to get it back down at some point. So hopefully it's not damaged to the point where it's inoperable, because that will be a very interesting predicament to have to try and get it back, to get the chopsticks back down in order to do any work on that. Oh man, they got really lucky. I mean, another thing that is something that I was wishing they would do, which they did not, was to fully clad the tower. And I get why not, because they truly probably believed that there was a chance that they were just going to lose the everything, like if the booster exploded on the pad. And so it may not necessarily be worth it to do that. But I mean, I feel like they got lucky that nothing actually touched the Drawworks cable. It is relatively protected, behind that wall, kind of. But if some of the higher areas, I mean, it is possible that things could have flown through there. So, yeah, that was pretty crazy that thing survived.
It is very crazy. But I was thinking if they had clad the entire OLIT, wouldn't there have potentially been more damage because of the way that those projectiles even went through the barrier that's there?
So these are thicker
Um,
plates than the barrier, I thought. Just looking at like how much damage like this received, this is a massive concrete chunk that hit this one.
yeah, I don't get why they didn't put an equally large plate on the Drawworks. I've always wondered why. I thought that was like a temporary plate that they were just putting until they got concrete up there, but they never ended up finishing that. Um, Man, yeah, that was a very, very large piece that hit right there. And without that, man, thank God they put that there, because they would have lost everything that's all of the machinery that's within those first three levels. So it's very, very good that they put that up.
Well, I mean, they would have found it, but it would have just been everywhere, beyond the integration tower.
I think he meant it would have been in pieces.
I know. I'm making it a pun, but yeah, it was bad. And I'm looking at this, and they got this blast area just right. Like, let me see if I can find a little bit better photo that shows the integration tower. Here we go. That's a pretty good one. So you can see that it pretty much is like an arc that goes around right here, where all of the damage from the blast and everything else from the launch basically takes place. So it's like, yeah, they got it just right here. For the most part, like, we went through and observed all of the other infrastructure on the tower. There wasn't really much damage. The most of it is actually like this. It lost a cap, which is okay. It's supposed to look like this. That's not a big issue. We don't have the rubber pads that are right here, but those just could be glued on. And this
I
cable
think there
is
was
a
on that
little
side.
bit. It's coming out just a little bit.
Say that again, Zach. You're a little muffled.
I think there was only one on that side originally.
Okay.
I could be
Yeah.
wrong. I'd have to go back.
No, I don't think you're wrong because it doesn't show the imprints of the other ones. And if you look on the other side where there's missing one, you can see an imprint. Well, there is an imprint.
I
Never
can
mind.
see an imprint over
Yeah, I
here
see
and
that
here,
now.
but the problem is that they already had a bunch of these here. So if you're right, Zach, they did go through and remove them manually before the launch, and I'm just still seeing the imprints
One thing
and
to note.
misremembering there.
Sorry, one thing to note before you go away from the Drawworks, something that Max Q mentioned. He says it's worth mentioning that there's electrical cabinets on either side of the Drawworks winch, and the ones in the OLM side could have acted like a sacrificial shield, and the concrete would have hit those things potentially, those cabinets, and then been deselected to the sides. It would have been like redirected, and that could have resulted in the plate being caved out from the inside. So the ricochet idea.
Yeah, the one of the bigger ones was there's a cabinet that's a bank full of resistors, and its job is to act as the brake. So you have AC motors in there. I think they probably have some sort of inverter or something, but they go through and put the resistors in the line with the AC motors, so that you can basically slow down the Drawworks. You're basically creating a little bit of voltage while you're doing that, and current. Basically, it's like basically having a generator, but you're putting it into resistor banks, and then they basically dump it out as heat. That was one of the ones I was kind of worried about, but these protected it. These panels did their job, but there's some, as Max pointed out, there is some other electrical cabinets and things in here that you don't want damaged, but it's better to not damage the Drawworks and have chopsticks potentially be able to fall or something terrible like that. They are actually built for really rugged environments out in the ocean, but they're not meant for blasts like this. I guess you could say that a lot of infrastructure for like not the sea launch platforms, but oil derricks, but this was basically taken from. I think it was Demios or Phobos. They used both of those for the different sites for 39 and here. They went through and reused all of that from a active oil drilling ship, or would have been active if it was the company that had gone bankrupt that sold them. But anyways, the useful part is that they could take a hit a little bit.
Kind of like the Cybertrucks. Just kidding. We're about an hour in, friend. Sorry, Zach, go ahead.
Oh, I was about to say the same thing. Number one, this is definitely by far the most people we've had in here during a live stream. So again, just wanted to thank all of you for being here. And if there's any new viewers in the chat, let us know that this is your first time ever checking in on this show, because we want to definitely acknowledge all the new viewers. And also, for those of you who haven't hit the like button so far, we'd definitely appreciate it if you could do. Oh, wow. Mauricio just hit 47,000 subscribers. So I
Woohoo!
guess we definitely do have some new viewers in here. And I believe we also probably have a ton of donations all the way from the start of the show that we haven't touched on yet. So,
We do. We have
Indy, would
lots
you
of
like to do those?
donations. Yes, I'd love to, actually. We'll start off from the very top. Jim Cavett donated $10 and says, all aboard. James Wilson came in with $10 and says, let's get this train chugging. James L. donated $20 and says 20 for the cams. Joffrey donated €10 and says choo choo. We also want to welcome Sakura Slight, who just became a member. Thank you for joining the RGV Aerial Flight Supporter team. We appreciate you. Then we have a $40 donation from JK Video, who says, don't forget sound energy. That's right. There's a lot of that, and that caused a lot of damage, I'm sure. We also got a super sticker for $1.99 from Mr. Sentient. And then we also received Sven donated €10 and says, thanks for all your great work. Thomas donated $20 and says, think you used enough dynamite there, Butch? Yes, I think so. We also got another super sticker for $10 from James Decker. JK Video, oh, that's a question. That's for Mauricio. We got another donation from Jim Cavett for $5. Says, thank you, RGV Aerial Photography. Ground Truth just became a member. Welcome, Ground Truth. We're excited to have you and hope the baby's doing well. Mike donated $20, says, huge thanks to all of you for all of the great pics and content. Tom Ray donated $2 and says, has a question about debris around the methane tanks that Mauricio will read. And those are all the donations so far. Thank you so much. Oh, and I need to check PayPal. I'll read PayPal in the next one.
Yeah, we have. I have the PayPal from the other account. Mauro sent $25 US. Continue your gorgeous job of flying over Starbase. Thank you so much, Mauro. I enjoyed every single time. Kenneth Coates sent $50 for a strong umbrella to keep concrete bits from hitting your head. Thank you. Thank you for that. And what were the questions that were associated with the super chats? Sir, did you leave them up?
I think I did.
Okay, so
no, I didn't. Sorry.
okay, well, I'll go ahead and read some of the questions. We got a lot of good questions today. As always, first questions from Stephen Lewis. If each Raptor produces 230 tons of thrust, how many engines can they lose before the rocket will not be able to lift a full 150-ton payload?
I'll have to get out the calculator real quick. But the vehicle itself, it would basically sit at the pad. If you think about it this way, if let's say it had, let's say I'll have to go through and do a quick measure here, because it's between 4,700 and you could almost call it 5,000 metric tons, just to be simplified. But it's 230 per Raptor. And your whole weight was starting out, let's say 47,000. And if you just divide that by 230, you get that you can have like 20 Raptors or 21 Raptors, or almost basically that and a little bit less thrust. That would basically be at a hover, and it would never lift off, at least at the beginning. But as it goes, it would basically go through the point at which it would start to eat up that fuel, because it's about 1 ton per second for each Raptor for the propellant, give or take. It's not something we have a direct number on, but basically an Elon number, basically. Anyways, you would eventually start to fly after that. You just sit there burning up fuel, and then you take off. So they kind of did something not as bad as that, but closer to that. So they were a thrust to weight ratio, as far as I can tell, for that first 12 seconds of about 1.16 repeated. That's what I was getting for the calculation I was throwing in. And It was not a good place to be. It's really slow. They lost 3 of the engines, and they were only at about 80% thrust for the remaining engines. So it's kind of interesting, but I think I answered your question, I hope.
All right, the next question is just from Rob Shaw. Was the liftoff at an intentional tower avoidance lean or luck that it leaned away?
So it looked to be an intentional maneuver because it continues that maneuver clear after the tower. It continues at that angle. And I think the best view was probably from either one of the photographers that were at like South Padre Island or from another cam view that was from SpaceX on the southern end of the beach there. Let me see if I can pull that up. I'll show that. Do you want to go ahead and ask the next question? And Zach, if you want to try to answer that one.
All right, the next question is from Chris. Why didn't the FTS explode earlier?
This is actually
That's
a really
good
good
question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure on that. I was thinking the same thing. So I think that part of it has to do with the fact that they were just like gathering data, you know what I mean? Like by allowing it to continue further. I think that, you could argue that after they lost 6 engines, they knew they weren't going to reach orbit. And so like, they could have technically triggered it much earlier. But at the same time, the amount of data that they gathered about how it's performing when it's, with that many engines out was probably a very important thing to gather. But as far as, this little maneuver that it did at the start, I think that was probably intentional to get it away from the pad as fast as possible. By lifting off in that way, they probably reduced to some degree the damage that happened underneath the pad, because had they lifted straight up, it would have been even worse, because this flame is like close to 900 feet long. And that is another interesting thing that a lot of people didn't believe that it would be as long as it is. But yeah, definitely close to a 900 foot long flame there. So yeah, getting away from the pad quickly was probably really helpful. And I think that maneuver also was what caused the doors on that one leg that you mentioned, Indy, to get blown off. And also there's a door on the side of the launch mount, the ring structure that got blown off as well. And I'm pretty sure that was a result of that pitching over right there.
And is it pitching over, or is it the electric slide? Because like the Astra slide.
Well, okay, so it does both. So right here, it's pitched over, and then it kind of straightens out a little bit more, but it slides right here. So you see how the base is just kind of going over to the left, and it's going a little bit more straight up, but at the same time, it's still going to the right. It's got a little bit more of momentum from that power slide.
Well, and it does that even in those 8 seconds that it's sitting on the pad before it actually starts going up. You see it slide slightly, and then it goes up.
Oh, yeah, it's definitely angled and pitching over as it's lifting off the pad.
And then it gets like super boomed and goes whoosh.
Yeah, and we went through and looked at like what the 3 possibilities were. So it's either intentional, or the clamps didn't release, or they had off thrust with the engines that they had available. Off thrust, the engines that were the 3 that went out don't match the location of the direction it should be doing that. So like the engines that are out are actually on the left-hand side. It should have basically thrown it into the tower if that was the case. So this was the exact opposite of that. Maybe it's overcorrected a little bit, but it does look like an intentional maneuver. And the best way to figure out the answer to this one is wait till the next launch, see how much they do of a power slide on that one. If it's exactly the same, or if it's just a little bit less, it's like, okay, that was intentional. This one was a little bit exaggerated, but they got it right off the mark on that particular maneuver.
So does the HPU bursting make the rocket go faster? Like, do the engines then start just going full blast or something? Because it seems like it takes off.
No, it looks like it's going faster just because of the flames of like the hydraulics, because you do have some hydraulic fluids coming down, and going into the flames, and it's just sucking it up, and you can see it move a lot quicker on those flames because otherwise you normally don't see that. So let me go back to right about there. That's
Yeah, it
about 30
seriously
seconds
just
in.
takes off.
Yeah, you don't have anything as a background to really gauge it by. So that's the unfortunate part with this element. So you'd have to have like the view of the ground or something, but it's still accelerating as normal. They might start at some point ramping up, and that would have been when some of those engines may have gone out. But at the point where it passes the tower right about there, this is the point at which I'm calculating that or that 1.16 repeated thrust weight ratio. Another thing to view right now, this is the perfect scene to do it.
Yes.
Look at all of these splashes, especially this giant one right here. I'm going to go back a little bit just so you can look at it. And there's dirt splashes all over the place for concrete.
It was Quack who reminded us that we thought it was fish the very first time we saw that when we saw the first launch or whatever. Static fire.
Wow, that's funny. Those are some big fish. Those are whales of fish.
It does look like they're jumping, though, initially. And then all of a sudden you realize those are rocks or debris.
Yeah.
Chunks of
Well, I highly
concrete.
doubt you'd be seeing fish from that far away. But
I'm just saying, he wasn't wrong when initially you think it's that same thing when we watched it rain down with concrete after the static fire with the 14 engines and the camera went down. It was like the same thing. It sounded like rain, and all of a sudden you just see these like chunks of concrete raining down.
This is probably the
That's
worst
so crazy.
I've seen of the destruction. Yeah, this is just on the other side. So Hoppy is nearby on this view, but I think it's just to the left or to the right. Let's see. There's Hoppy. It's actually thin-skinned.
That building looks like a A-10 Warthog did a pass over it with its autocannons.
Yeah, just about. See, this is why they don't allow people here. This is also why they cleaned up the pad to be almost immaculate, because they didn't want extra FOD. They didn't want stuff breaking that didn't need to be broken. One thing that was surprised is Monday, I think they removed all of the boom lifts except maybe like 2. And then on Thursday when they flew, they had like 6 or 7 of them, and like half of them just got destroyed. The other half are probably suspect.
The railings are all bent too. That's what's crazy as
Yeah.
well.
Oh, the cameras were along a railing over here, I think, and they're just gone. We don't know what's happened to them yet. The photographers haven't been allowed back in there yet to collect their cameras. It might be that SpaceX just goes through and collects all the camera equipment and gear and then just puts it on a table for them to pick up, because it's like, do you think this is your camera? Maybe, maybe not. It's just pieces of a camera.
I don't understand why they let them put their cameras there, because to me, it was very obvious that most of them weren't going to survive. Like, it's not, I don't know. Like, I didn't even apply for a media pass because I'm like, I'm not putting anything anywhere near there. I've seen it multiple times what happens during lower engine static fire tests. You know, it's you do have the blast, the debris, and then there's a very hot vortex that forms on the landing pad. So there was not really a whole lot of chance for anything to really survive over there.
But then it's also on the photogs too, right? Like, so EDA had a $30,000 mount sitting right there that got pummeled and still looked to be fine, but $30,000 in an area you know that the potential of it being destroyed is very high. Seems like
he had a close run-in on SN11. I thought he would have learned his lesson and gone, okay, I'm going to go ahead and do a little bit cheaper on this. I'm going to put it a little bit further back in another location. One of those two, but he went for, I'm going to get as close as possible. And actually, this wasn't the location where he put, I think, that one. He put that over by the pad
lot.
cam.
Yeah, where the trucks were.
Pad cam location.
Yeah.
Just to put into perspective of how bad those cameras are probably in, a bracket, like a tripod bracket, ended up on the opposite side of the fence in the parking lot. So somebody's like, "Oh, I found this. Hey, that was from my camera that I placed on the launch pad."
Oh my!
So
goodness.
it was over here. Now it's over like here, right?
Right. So those cameras are pretty much done.
The only thing
And
you
that's-
can do is hope to find the SD card and hope it's still salvageable.
Yeah, we should take a look at some of the other damage from the area too, because that was one thing I was like, this front gate is going to end up halfway across the road,
And
which it did.
Well,
Yeah.
actually, the fence is the one that ended up halfway across
That's
the road.
what he's talking about.
But the
Not
gate,
that one, the
the
D2.
gate. Oh, okay. But this gate actually stayed up, and we've had problems with gates over here. This is all over the road. So gates all over here.
We have a better view that shows that one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm looking for it because it's zoomed in and it looks really nice. This should
And
be
it's
a good
only
one.
the piece that's left. There's only it's a piece left after the gate fell on the poor fellow, and then it got blown out, and now there's even a smaller piece left.
Yeah, there was the gate that went across here. That's what you're referring to on the one that fell on the worker, and those things are dangerous. If you ever have a gate that is falling over, get away from it because they are
Good advice.
dangerous heavy. My uncle was crushed by one. He survived, but he had broken hip, broken arm, broken leg.
Thomas,
It
way
was
to bring
bad.
it down.
Anyways, this is a broken fence, and I'm not sure if this is the one that was here or if it
No,
was
that-
the one that was
that's
here.
Yeah, that's part of the sliding gate. When I drove by it after yesterday, that was like one of the first things they were doing was setting up a new temporary gate.
They had one already up as of yesterday. I thought the really temporary one. Dave had a name for it, and I can't remember what it was.
Yeah, these shipping containers used to be straight. No longer are they straight. They're pushed over in this direction.
The shipping containers used to be whole without holes, and now they all have holes.
Now they're Swiss cheese. And there's
Stuffing
the
coming
fence
out.
right here where the photographers zip tied their cameras to, and on the tripods or just directly to the bit. I saw one that was just like cloth and tape, and that was it. And it was like a GoPro, and I'm like, yep, that's the way to do it, because there's no way most of this will survive. But at least with the cloth, you got a little bit of dampening, and the tape will allow it to be released if it needs to be. But the question is, I don't know if they're going to be able to find it. It's just so much debris over here, just piled up, and it's going this direction. Hoppy had pieces all the way over past the cameras. So that's where I was talking about. The pad cam location was right here. This is where the secondary site was. So this was the close site for all the cameras and photographers were basically just in here. And then the rest were all in this location.
And credit to the collaborative creators who actually poked fun at their own self with their merch when the NSF car and stuff like that, the T-shirt and all that stuff. It was hilarious.
Yeah, the van, it basically just got imploded on the back pillar. You can even see it right here. It's just gone right there. Lab lost basically the windshield was completely cracked, so that needs to be replaced. The sunroof window and all of the passenger side windows were all just blown out. But
he was able to start the car and drive it out.
Yep, he had to go through and do the thing he has to do with charging it every time, because it kind of sits there for a little while, because it's always just sitting around getting us good video, and that's always fun. So I wanted to actually go through a little bit more on the site, at least on the ground photography, to go over a couple of things that were broken, or the destruction. It's not too bad as long as you realize this is a water tank. This was a water tank, but it's empty. It's not used. And the water tank that's inside of here is actually 9 meters, and this is a 12.4 meter shell
without perlite in between.
Yeah, perlite is basically like an insulation, and it does actually help provide a backing. So, for instance, this tank is a LOX tank, and it had perlite in it. However, it didn't stop what I think was rebar just going right through. Was it this one?
But
or
it
was
won't
it
stop it on this side. What it does is protect the inner tank.
Well, it's supposed to, but we had a leak, I think, out of this one, or maybe I have to go through and look at a different photo
I
here.
think it was that one. It had the little puff coming out the top.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just don't. I'm not sure if that was the hole or if that was just a dent. So I'm seeing if I can find another view. Yeah, probably doesn't show it on this view, but anyways, yeah, there was a puncture. It goes all the way into the inner tank, and it's not just the in between shell. It went all the way, and it's probably like a bow and arrow with a piece of rebar, because rebar was flying everywhere. I'm surprised they didn't have more damage. And actually, it's still kind of visible of what happened as well from another perspective. Let me pull that up.
This is why I think it's a drive-by, because look at the angle of all of the, like it all goes, I mean, this is what you see when, sadly, when there's a drive-by.
Yeah, that's just a scary thought. I haven't really, needed to ever think about that. I'm just thinking of it looking like a war zone, because that's what you see on news is some war zone. It just has destruction, and it kind of has that look, because this itself had so much energy. It was like a bomb continuously going off. I mean, it's a controlled explosion, really. That's what a rocket is you're trying to basically control what would be an explosion and keep it under the levels where it is not going through and using, or at the level of, it's not conflagration, or maybe it is, but basically the speed of sound as far as the flame front is what you're looking at. So if it goes faster than the speed of sound, that's a problem. That's basically an explosion. You don't want that. You want it less than that. But you want to get it as close to that point as possible. Anyways,
Here's that chunk.
this is a massive chunk of concrete. It landed here on this, and it even came over on this side.
Probably
and
bounced and slid off.
And it smashed into the ground over here and became just pieces of concrete. And you can see just rebar and maybe some of its pipes that were off of this tank just lying on the ground as if it's normal.
Can you see that big street, where that big chunk went? On the road? On the road.
Oh, that one.
Yeah. That's probably the biggest chunk that's missing from just under the OLM. If you draw a line, not that you can do that, Thomas, but if you were to draw a line, I bet you would lead to that road.
Yeah, I'm
Right
just
there,
trying to
bottom
find
right.
bottom right.
Yep.
You think that's it? 'Cause I think this is further down towards the.
Oh, doggone it! You're right. My bad. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm trying to find just the right or the correct photo. There we go. This will show it, but it's not perfect. You see this massive, like, what happened here?
It landed and then slid.
Yeah, it had enough momentum that it smashed here and then it just kept going across the road all the way over to like this side. And there's just this pile of dirt and concrete across the whole thing.
Yeah, you don't even see the slab anymore. That's how much it disintegrated.
At first view, when you look at that, it looks like the road is damaged or it could have been damaged because of that, but it's not. It was perfectly fine. I drove down there and no issues on the road.
The dirt, however, wasn't.
Yeah.
I thought there were lots of potholes still. Is that not the case? Mauricio?
Nope, it was pretty good. The road looked really fine.
Good.
Yeah. Did you show the other concrete slab that was on top of the the fluids bunker, Thomas?
Yeah, I'm gonna find the ground shot of it here.
He did.
There's
and
this one.
He's gonna show it again.
This is the concrete that we were looking at from above, and you can see it's just hanging here. There was another one that showed one of the COPVs looked like it was split in half, or not COPVs, but they're pressure canisters. Like this one, it looks pretty bad actually, but these can hold up to like 200 something bar of pressure, or potentially depends on the canister and what's rated for. So they are high pressure gas canisters. They'll hold nitrogen, methane, oxygen as gaseous forms. They've got some other ones that are heliums out front. I don't think they have any helium on these ones.
You said they were nitrogen, although what does the green label say?
That would be nitrogen, I believe.
I think it's nitrogen.
Oxygen.
I think it's nitrogen on the far side. Hold on, I gotta look at these labels for them again.
There's the door from the OLM that we
Yeah,
were talking about earlier. What Zach was talking about where it blew out. Now,
I'm
do
just
we?
trying to find the
Sorry,
OLM now where it blew out because the pictures are quite in order. Let me see if I can change that
pictures are
because
worth a
it's
thousand words.
yeah. And if they're and then when they're in order, they actually tell the story a little bit better of where things go.
But I wonder, do we think that that door imploded and then exploded, or just exploded? Because it looks like it's bent inwards and then out. But then I understood you guys thought differently as well.
Yeah, I went through and took a look at the orbital launch mount table, and the issue that I found was that it was scratched. Let me see if I can find it. Like, okay, this almost shows it. So you can see these scratch marks right here. It appears that a piece of concrete came over from right to left and whacked into the side of the door. And then when we go back and look at the door, you'll see there's an impression in this region right here. So like there's a large dent, and I think what happened is it just whacked it here and then opened the door, and then the rocket took it out the rest of it. Because they now have an open door, it just became a free floating object. I don't think Mercy actually got a close up view. Did you stand over this one, or I'm looking at looked at so many photos. I think probably Connor's photo he took a picture of. Should be able to grab here as well.
It's the
See,
same as Mauricio's.
oh, well, he took I think like stood over it and took some pictures of it, but it was right next to the property line, so Connor didn't go any further to actually stand over it, but it was pretty close. And I don't think there's any more of that. So I think that was just Connor's photo I was thinking of. Yeah, this is the one I'm pretty sure is the hole.
Yeah, that looks like the hole.
But yeah, I can't like this looks gray, and I'm pretty sure it should look black, unless it's a different spot somewhere else. But
Why
yeah,
should it look
I do
black?
remember because it's a hole. It's dark. It's basically what holes will be. It's as black as you can get on the inside of a shadow of something like this is where it should be just black. But anyways, it was venting out of the hole, which it shouldn't be, and it was a good amount of vent. It even had like a little bit of liquids at one point that looked like it was coming out at the beginning. So they also went through and detanked, I believe, this tank, what was remaining inside of it. And so they did they basically put it through the LOX overpressurization line in order to remove all of the LOX in here, because it's not good to have too much of an oxygen environment, especially around vehicles or anything that could be flammable that's basically has a combustion ongoing, because things will start to combust really well into the point where they break or other things catch fire. Did we want to go over anything else directly on the launch site that was something we've completely just haven't talked about? Because there's quite a bit here. But was there anything specific, Zach, that you wanted to go over?
Not in particular. I mean, there's still a lot to digest here. I've kind of got some more like thoughts on it as far as what they can do as far as repair work goes, but we're still working on those theories and trying to get everything together now. So hopefully, might have that stuff out here soon. But yeah, I mean, I feel like we've touched on most of it. I mean, it's just an incredible amount of damage. It's really shocking that it went down like that. And I don't know. I mean, I'm hoping that I have a hard time believing that this kind of thing can be completed in anything less than 6 months. I don't know. We're gonna find out though. If anybody is going to be able to pull it off, it's definitely the SpaceX team. So hopefully they are ready to go and ready to get all of that work done, and it doesn't involve actually taking the entire launch mount down, because that would be hard to watch.
Yeah, that would be bad. So there's really kind of going through and just prefacing this. There's two ways that they can go about fixing this. One is they just cut everything down to the base. They reuse these columns. They're still good as far as columns, but they might do additional columns elsewhere. So in between and a little bit further out, for instance. So they just basically start from a clean slate, have some older stuff that can still be used to help support the structure. That wouldn't be a bad idea, but you're talking about at least a year delay kind of thing.
You really think a year? I don't think a year.
Yeah, it would be bad. It would be because you have to go through, do all of the groundwork here again. You have to go through and, of course, clean up the site, cut off the table, cut off each of the legs,
But they
remove
have an
everything.
OLM ready in KSC that they could very easily shift over here if they needed to
Yes.
start over again.
Yeah, so that's good news. And so they would have to ship that over. And that's one of the things we've been looking at is that in order to really like satisfy NASA as far as the goals and objectives of what Starship was, especially that first flight, they said, well, it could basically just blow up the whole orbital launch mount and infrastructure. And they basically, it looked like we're staging the integration tower segments and the table as if we want to find out if this is going to be a go for 39A, or do we need to send it over to Boca Chica at Starbase in order to replace all this infrastructure that could be destroyed? Because this is their test site, right? They don't want that happening over at 39A. They want it to happen here. If it's going to happen anywhere, it should happen here, because this is the location where they are making all of the infrastructure changes and design needs for the boosters and the starships and everything. So if you got to get right, you got to get right here first. And so there at least was Michael Paul mentioning that, he thinks that some of his buddies are, getting ready to move the table and send it out here. I don't even think that's quite right, because they've just barely begun inspections on this and figuring out what to do. So you can go through and do repair work on this. This can be salvaged. That's the other path. And I think that's the better path, because you're talking at maybe 6 to 8 months. It's not the 2 to 3 months that Elon's talking about. You have to kind of multiply his numbers by at least 3 to get a reasonable number. The only way to not be like the 6 to 8 months is you're going to have to spend a lot of money in order to bring in a lot of people, coordinate it so immaculately that you've basically have an orchestra of workers coming in and out and basically rebuilding this structure to be what it was, but better. So upgraded everything. So we're going to see what they're going to do very quickly. It's not going to be taking too long to find out which direction they go. So are they going to start removing pieces off of it, or are they just going to go ahead and repair infrastructure each week? Mauricio does these flyovers. It will give us that in-depth detail each week. And that's where I guess we should kind of plug it again, is you should support through either PayPal or Patreon in order to make that happen, because it does cost quite a bit of money to fly on each of these flights. He's doing, I did 2 this last week, and that's kind of a little bit abnormal, sorry, because we did have the flight. We did want to see what was going on under there, the launch table, and then we also got these photos, which are just amazing. So let's see if there's other pictures we want to look at from Mauricio.
I can ask a quick question
yeah.
here and see what you all think. Robert G asked, looking at all the damage to the surrounding area, will SpaceX be required to do a new environmental review? If so, how long will it delay the launch for the next?
I don't think they would be required to do a new environmental review. They would basically go through and say with the FAA, here is the issues with the vehicle, specifically that they are going through a review process on that, but not a full environmental review. So one of the things that happened here is that based off of their test data, they were not expecting to see all of this damage. We had a static fire of 31 engines for about 6 seconds at 49% thrust, and we saw nothing near the level of damage that this is showing. So basically that vibration from the Raptors and the pressure and the heat didn't help any, just obliterated the underside of that orbital launch mount. And that concrete, that fondag, it's a type of concrete, did not stand a chance. We thought it would, but it didn't. And so you end up with a result that you have to rebuild some of this infrastructure, the foundations of the infrastructure, really. and make sure that everything is still level, that you don't have cracks or other things. One of the potential worst sides of things is actually on the orbital launch mount legs itself. So they're going to have to go through and drill some holes, I believe, inside these legs to verify what the inside contents look like. They basically go through, drill holes into the metal, and then they will go through and bore it to see, like, is it just sand? Is it basically been pulverized? Because if it's that bad, there's no way that you're going to reuse this infrastructure. You have to start over because it's not going to be able to hold up the pressures of another vehicle on top. That's one of the directions that it could go. I don't think it will be that bad. I think it's just the question of how long it's going to take to rebuild what they have here, and not needing extra parts coming in from, let's say, Florida.
I had another question here. The next one's from Lyric. Sorry, it's from Lyric. Brett, one of the aerial shots shows concrete at the foot of one of the legs appearing drilled. Was some of the outer concrete already compromised prior to the OTF?
From what I can understand, the drilling is basically the legs up here that he's referring to. These were empty voids. They didn't have any concrete or anything in them. And we always were wondering why they did that. And maybe we missed it at some point. They just brought in a pumper truck and nobody paid attention for a day or something. Nope, it was all last minute. They brought a pumper truck in a couple weeks back and pumped these full of concrete. So that's what they were really going through and doing. They drilled into these legs up here to pour concrete into them. These ones, I haven't seen much there. There is something actually going on here. I just noticed. Maybe there's something he's referring to about the legs themselves that I haven't seen. If these are the things he's talking about as drill holes, which that would be interesting if those were indeed the case. I'm just noticing those now. I don't know what those are from, unless they are from something else, like drill holes. But I didn't see any boom lifts or anything that would have been up there high enough to get access to that.
Let me ask another question here from Sentient about launch site. Did the clamp levers retract? The door is the field is sketchy. Wonder if the inside is roasted.
I think it's probably okay. We saw some pictures from lab, or a picture from lab, that it didn't look great, but it was more like the plates themselves got burned and everything else probably is okay. It's just that door came off, and it's either a question of, did it explode from the inside? And I don't think it did. I think it was just concrete smashing into the side of it, and then it just ripped it off from the flames of the Raptor. The other side of that question is, if the mounts is now crooked, that's going to be an issue. I don't think it really would be crooked, but everything else on the inside seems to be pretty much fine because it took all the heat on the top of the plates.
All right.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, we have a question from Whenever. Do you think it's time to replace the other vertical tanks with horizontal ones for safety and just build a water tank elsewhere on site?
That's been a common theme for a while now, that once the damage of these occurred, this one's useless. It's empty. These two are water tanks. You can put them elsewhere. We have talked about putting a water tank behind the integration tower. And so all you're left with would be LOX and nitrogen. So you could basically put horizontal LOX and nitrogen tanks in here pretty quickly. It's just finding the right sized tanks. These are currently 9-meter tanks in diameter, but they are actually sitting up about this high. So it starts from like this point and goes up. So they're a bit more elevated. So you'd basically have to go through and find a way of putting in some new infrastructure and plumbing it in. And it would also have to work with pressures, because One issue is they want to have a higher head pressure for their locks to go into the pumps themselves. Otherwise, you create cavitation and other issues, and that'll burn out the LOX pumps or the actual impellers on the pumps pretty quickly, and you don't want that. So there's going to be some other pieces that would come into play, but I think they could. It's within possibilities because they have to go through and take out all of the insulation of this tank and repair the hole on the inner tank, and then they could probably repair the one here on the outside or on the inside, but they'll have to use scaffolding to do that, and the insulation in here is just going to be horrendous to remove. But they do have services that do that.
All right, and going back to the spots on the hose that we thought of on the launch mount legs, Craneman says that those dark spots on the leg are weld marks from the second staircase.
Oh, that's right. It's not there anymore, but that is making sense because you can see these. Okay, thank you, Crane Man. I was confused for a little bit because I'm looking up and not looking down at this, and I honestly thought this would have gotten ripped off. Like, it's not the best position for anything like this. It has large panels, so I was thinking these would get ripped off. It didn't. It held on strong. But thank you, Crane Man.
All right, and then here's another question from Randy. Was the first larger FTS explosion actually the Starship because it was full, and the smaller second one was a booster FTS?
So the first one we should see, and I'll go back to it here real quick. It should be the booster is the first one. We can actually see the flames eating its way up the booster. And the videos we have from like Tim Dodd, he's got a really good view of this as well. It does show the booster, and it starts at the engines. It works its way up this way, and then it's basically explodes in essence. And then the ship is actually just kind of fine. It's odd, but it's just sitting there. I don't know why it keeps doing that, but it's just sitting there with the forward section of the booster attached to the aft section of the Starship. So it's still clamped on, and that's something that needs to be changed. But the vehicle looks to be okay. It's only missing 4 tiles. It was missing 4 tiles in another view. Maybe it was. I guess I didn't load it here, but they showed another view of this where it was the full stack. It looked pretty good. It was missing those 4 tiles, but anyways, they do need to go through and change the clamp mechanism here so that if the ship is saying, oh, we're out of tolerance, I'm going to have to abort, and this would be for human rating specifically, it needs to have a connection to the motors of the booster somehow to open and actuate those motors in case the booster has failed. That's something I think it would be a requirement for at least a human rating. And you could still have the clamps on the booster. That's what they are right now. They've never really been on the ship. They had other systems to be able to attach with the ship before. Anyways, that's I hope answered your question that it was the booster first that exploded, and then the ship. It was an FTS on the ship. The booster, I think it was mostly an explosion of the engines because they had like high LOX, low methane as far as the propellants goes. And you end up with this situation where the engines are eating themselves and it finally just let go. That was the first one we see, and you can see it on this part of the video.
We have a question from Dave, $5 donation as well. Thank you, Dave. The FAA permit to fly had certain safety assumptions. This looked to be unsafe launch, debris damage, etc. I would think the FAA would pull the permit. What do you think, Thomas?
So it's based off of data that SpaceX has. That they know that they were looking at the data as we know that this should work based off of the data. And so we've submitted that to the FAA. The FAA went through and said, oh, looks good. Okay, we're going to go ahead and give you that part of the launch license. So check off on the launch infrastructure that it's not going to be an environmental issue. But it became an environmental issue because the the thing that SpaceX was looking at as a long-term solution to a maintenance problem. They don't want to go through and replace Fondag little chunks here and there every once in a while. That's what they were looking at. They wanted to put in a steel plate system that would essentially give them the ability to these pieces have very little maintenance on the concrete or the Fondag below it. So that was a good solution, but it came too late at this part. And as far as the whole part of the FAA going through and redoing an environmental assessment, I don't think it would be quite necessary at this time. So it's all about the safety of the vehicle. The question is that many people will ask about the vehicle side is why didn't it go off before? It was still within the range. There is a large corridor that the vehicle was going down, and even though it made kind of like a right turn and then made a left turn and was basically doing a spiral that whole time, it was still within that launch corridor. So it was still within that realm of being safe. Once it was starting to head out of that launch corridor, it would have basically hit that FTS, but it wasn't actually the FTS that hit. I think it was really that the booster started to go. We also do have a little bit of cool information. So there's a website called flightclub.io that it shows all of the information of basically all of the nitty gritty statistics and numbers of what they can find based off of available camera data to say, like, what's the angle of attack? It was all over the place. What's the elevation? All these little numbers that you can go through and look at as a useful bit of data to go through and run your own simulations or anything else. But I just wanted to give these guys a shout out because they did some amazing work to go through and understand some information here. Any other questions? Either FAA or anything else?
All right. The next question from Rhino is, if they are removing and replacing the tanks, is there a reason they wouldn't add a few extra rings and get to more capacity for recycles within 4 days?
So you said recyclers for being able to recycle the ship within 4 days?
I guess he's trying to say recycles as in, just to avoid the, I guess, more capacity in terms of not waiting 2 days to the next launch attempt, right? That's probably what Rhino means.
Yeah, so and to solve that issue, one thing that SpaceX had talked about at one point, and this will probably come up later on, is when they have the second integration tower and second fuel farm under construction, one thing they would like to do is do a crossover connection between the two fuel farms and basically the launch infrastructure. So that would basically give them the ability to basically load all their propellants on one side of the fuel farm, transfer it to another if one side is not working for, let's say, the LOX tanks or the LOX pumps are just not working right, some issue. Well, we don't need to scrub and recycle. We just need to go ahead and switch over to the other side. And that might take the something like the red team to go out and discover that the issue is not something they can solve and that needs to be flipped over to the other side of the system. That would be an amazing approach to having that side of the recycling or the lack of delays. It would basically be, okay, we could go ahead and launch anytime today as long as we are within that window. I think that's an approach that would work out very well.
Do you want to hear some donations now?
Yeah, let's do that.
All right. So starting from the top, we have a donation from, we have a super sticker from Mikael, who donated 129 Czech koruna, or that's what the super sticker is for. Thank you for that. 20 pound donation from 12 or 12. Thanks for the coverage. We also have a donation from James L., who donated another $20 and says, here's another 20 for future flyovers. Thanks, James. Russ Clinton donated $10. Thorleaf donated 50 Swedish krona and has a question that Mauricio can ask. And we also got another super sticker for $10 from El Hungaro. Thank you all for your donations. We appreciate it. And Mauricio, I will not delete the question if you want to ask it. Or I can ask it on your behalf. Let me ask it. Thorleaf is asking, how did the BQD fare? Another door missing, and there, I guess it's supposed to say from there, was venting from that hole after launch for a long time? So these are the questions.
The booster QD. So yeah, there was the door right here that came off. And I'm not sure where this door ended up. We haven't found it yet, but it came off by the hinges. And you can still see the bolts are in place. And it just got ripped out. You can actually see that this one is in a very similar state where the bolt holes have actually started to come off on the top plate. The bottom one looks like they're still in place. The QD on the other side, the arm looks like it might be bent a little bit, so maybe concrete hit it. But other than that, it actually looked pretty good. There was an issue. We could see that it was venting over here continuously, and it would basically be a non-controlled state that the whole orbital launch table was in. So one of the things we could see on, let me flip over to the aerial shots here. There is a issue with the electric lines, I believe. Just need to find the right picture here. This will probably be good enough. Over here, that would basically indicate that there was damage to this part of the infrastructure. So they lost probably sensors and communications and other things inside the table. It could be just a power issue throughout the whole facility. That was another thing that we kind of noticed, is that they didn't quite have power going to everything, and they had some generator issues or something, but they filled up a generator and everything started to work again. So it looks like that it was either a power issue on this side, or that it was communications and data and power that were basically lost here. That was the other side of things that as far as damage goes, that the table itself seemed to have. Any other questions on that or anything else?
Yes, what were the questions that you wanted me to read out, Indian sir?
I actually read them on your behalf. So if you want to
Okay,
ask
sorry
another
about
one,
that.
no, please don't be. If you want to ask another one, you're welcome to. We have lots of questions. Thomas, you might want to be aware of that. So towards the end, we have lots of questions.
Okay, I'll try to do hot fire then, or as fast as I can.
Rapid fire.
Rapid fire, that's the one.
Hot fire is different.
All right, we got a question here from Sentient. Is there any shots of the inside of the OLM, like behind where that door was? Did all 20 inside clamps levers shut?
The only thing we have is from the a picture from lab, and everything looked like it was closed, looked like it was sealed, so we're probably okay on that. Zach, did you have anything that you saw that was different?
Sorry, can you repeat that question?
Did everything look like it was sealed up on the doors for the QDs, the outer 20 QDs?
Yeah, I mean, I would expect those to be pretty well protected. They have a lot of shielding on those. I mean, it would be really tough to actually break one of those open because of the way the mechanism works. So the actual clamp would have to be still retracted or extended if something like that were to happen. But yeah, I mean, and just kind of adding on what you were saying before about the launch mount, like communications. That doorway right there on the bottom right of that image is open. The doorway on the leg.
Yeah, right there.
Yeah, that's where all the comms come into the launch mount. So with the way that the doorway above that came off as well, and then the one below, so it I wonder if that was the path that it tilted in, and so if that doorway came off and then the thrust from those engines was going straight into that opening, then it's highly likely that they lost complete control of the launch mount. I would be surprised if they have any communications with it at all right now. And yeah, that would explain why it was venting for so long. It just probably died in a state where the valves were still open. And so, without having any ability to close the valves, they had to just let all of the liquid oxygen and I think they did it. I think they did both liquid oxygen and liquid methane. They had to empty both lines. Just
they're
let them
both purging at the same time. It was really awkward. I was like, okay, well, I hope that's the lock side over on this side that's purging a lot. I'm hoping the methane it's not so much. But they did seem to have the system at the fuel farm reconditioning. So it was, at least it was stable enough that it was self-regulating. We could tell that. What was the next question that we had?
Let me read that. I'm actually about to head off. I am going to
Okay.
start back. There's a pretty massive storm right now, but I think it's starting to pass.
Yeah, I heard there's tornadoes, or at least a tornado warning in the area. So stay safe.
Keep in touch, please.
Yeah, I will do. I got like a 22-hour drive ahead, so getting out of Texas is pretty key because that's where the biggest storms are.
Yes.
Yeah. And then make sure you keep eye of underpasses. If you start to see rain coming in, you might get some hail. That's always a good place to get under if you have, golf ball sized hail or something.
Yeah, sure. I think my car already took a good amount of damage on the way here. Just have a vinyl wrap that I put on it like 3 years ago, and there's pretty massive bugs in Texas. So when they hit the wrap, it just was peeling back in some spots. I'm like, oh man,
the bugs are bigger in Texas.
Yeeks.
Yeah, they're massive.
Everything's bigger in Texas.
I was gonna say that's what they say.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me on today, everyone. I will see you all next week, and enjoy the rest of the show.
Thank you for joining us, Zach, and drive safe on your way home, and Godspeed.
All right, take care, everyone.
Bye, Zach.
Bye.
Godspeed, Zach.
Now, do we have any other questions for the launch site? Because there's plenty we could go through, but it's just a lot of debris and damage here and there, but nothing too critical. I think we've covered the big ones.
There's a really good one here from Bonji. Or can the OLM can be made a few meters taller to give the exhaust more space without major changes to the tower, apart from raising the ship QD?
You would have to raise the ship QD. They've already raised it once, about 5 feet. So you could raise it a little bit more, but not more than a few feet, because they're kind of already limited on that side for the ship QD side, as you mentioned. Otherwise, you would have to go through and replace all of the ship QD infrastructure. So I don't think that would be as tenable of an option. But the other direction you could go, and really this this picture kind of says it all, is you just kind of go down a little bit. But it's not really the problem of going down or going up or anything like that. It's preventing this from happening. And you can see that the launch table itself, on all the aerial shots, including these and everything else, the launch table was just perfectly fine. It got blasted by more than 5,000 metric tons of thrust. It's that's what it is, just to do a hover, basically. So you're looking at at least 6,000 metric tons of thrust or something like that. The bottom being scoured like that, though, that's just the fondag just breaking up. It's probably sympathetic vibrations and power and heat. Just that pressure just completely just destroyed it. As soon as that went, everything else around, it started popping up stuff here. This was about to go. This concrete over here went. The concrete over in this area, we don't even know where that one went. It's just everywhere. So it's just really stopping the central part, and then you work out with steel plates at least to a good probably 10 meters out. So that's going to be, 15 feet? Oh, no, about 30 feet or more, because that's really what the meters are. I have to think of metric and feet. Sorry.
Did you want to show that image that Max Q shared with us this morning, where you can see the fellow in the actual hole?
We don't have permission to share that.
It's
one,
on Twitter.
Unfortunately. Yeah, but it's not one we can share.
Okay.
All right.
Sorry.
The next question is just Domino. Does anyone know the reason that SpaceX had to launch before Deluge and Flame Diverter was installed. I'm sure they had. Me personally, I'm pretty sure they. That's another question. Do you think they anticipated this much damage? Right.
Oh yeah, they didn't anticipate this much damage for the underside of the table. The thing is they expected that this could happen, but at an explosion level event, that you would have taken out the tower, the table, maybe parts of the fuel farm. They really didn't know. Like, that was the question. They needed to get that launch data. They got a lot of really good data. Like, the vehicle itself, structurally, it's amazing. Like, that thing flipping around, most rockets would have folded in half. They would have done a number of terrible things as far as the structure and just blowing up and things. But coming back down to this is that this was not without, the realm of possibilities that they would have to go through and either replace all of this table. And I don't think they still need to do that. I think there's, still a 50-50 option on this, that they just go through and repair it and do the upgrades. And if it breaks it again, then you have good data say, okay, we really need to rethink some of this launch infrastructure. But I don't think that's going to be the case. I think it's going to be, okay, we got a panel that bent out of place or is warped after the next launch, that kind of thing. That will be more of the direction that it should go. But then again, reality and speculation, or even the science that they've done, and looking at the models, our simulations, none of them had this as what would happen. Otherwise, they would have never done this. Was there any other questions, or should we move on to, I guess, the integration side, or basically the village, and then to the build site, and then to Massey's?
I guess one last question before we move on. One is from a $5 donation from Norman Robinson. Greetings from the Bermuda Islands. Any chance components can be salvaged, which might give insight? Engines were out in the first 10 seconds. So do you think they'll salvage to get more information, from the engines going out?
Probably not. It's all the telemetry and the visuals that SpaceX, they have other cameras, I think, on board in the engine section, as well as cameras inside the launch table, on the integration tower, and just tons of sensors everywhere on those engines themselves. The thing that I think was the common issue, you can have a couple of engines just not ignite properly. That's going to be the place where most engines seem to go out. Looking at McGregor, it's at startup, at turnoff. That's when you're going to have a bit of an explosion, or the Raptor just starting to eat itself, at least. So, and I think, in essence, I think they're going to go ahead and look at the FOD issue as the main culprit, just based off of what we saw. Like, we had pieces flying all over the place. I'm pretty sure it may have smacked one or two of those engine bells at least, and that caused a cascading failure. That's my belief, at least in the what happened here. So I don't expect to see them to look at the vehicle as having too many problems. They'll find some issues, and engines are always going to be an issue, but not to this extent. Like, most of the vehicles seem to be just like a tank. It went through all of this concrete that was like the size of school buses and everything else. Was lucky enough to not be blowing up on the pad, but I think it did get some damage to lines or the bells themselves. There's plenty of possibilities. It's just a question of what basically caused the first issues, and you basically have to go through and work your way through the list.
All right, and the last question here from Cosmic. At what point does the BQD release? I seen it still connected after all the engines started.
So that should basically be disconnecting between the engine starting and at the T-minus 5 seconds or 6 seconds, which is at liftoff, and it takes less than a second for that booster QD to pull away and retract. We've seen it go pretty fast. It's about a second or less.
I hear Sunny or Jax.
That was Charlie.
Oh, darn.
All right. Well, I think with that, we should head over to the integration site.
Let's do it.
So this was back on the 17th. As we said before, we had 2 flyovers. So we got some good views of what's going on everywhere. I noticed kind of the first thing is that this area is kind of just now being neglected. This is going to be like the future neighborhood, I guess you could call it. So they've gotten the groundwork prepared to put in additional homes or tracts for not exactly trailers. They're not wanting to do many more of these. I think they want to do more of these tiny homes. They're not exactly the biggest of houses or the smallest, but they're good sizes, and they would be able to fit in here. And this would be perfect for workers to be able to utilize. So this is a road right in here, as well as this one. But you'll see these weird like curves. I think that's just because of the terrain itself. Like this is an area that's low, and you get water in it, like this spot right here. So that's why it is straight, and then it kind of curves over and avoids this area. And even it avoids that spot. But anyways, this is kind of one of those interesting spots that I've been looking at. One of these, I think this one right here is either this one or this one. That was basically the Roman Catholic Diocese of Brownsville or something. That they had a plot of land that SpaceX is now leasing or owns. I didn't see any change of ownership on that yet, so I think they've leased it. They are still building homes around the village, so these are the really the nicer ones, I think, so far than these. But I'm hoping they would continue to do these over here as well. And then this is really what I call the integration site, because this would be the tracking station, the solar farm, but I go everything based off this one building. It's the integrations building. Pretty much everything got stuck over here or put over here. Let me see if I've got a better view of just that one location. So before the launch, they put the Raptor lift stand over here, as well as deluge piping that they need to go through and connect over at the launch site. They brought it all over here because, well, we saw the damage that the first flight had, and it's better to have all of the things that could move or get broken brought away. So you see a lot of that still here, including the compressed gas cylinders here. And this is BART, at least that's what we call it. It's a platform that moves up and down. But one thing actually I need to mention is, as an idea, this is something I was talking about with everybody yesterday, is if we wanted to have some sort of flame diverter underneath the launch mount, we thought, well, you could basically do something like BART, but it's a kind of like a cylinder shape. It has some other hinges that would allow it to fold, and you would then be able to bolt it down to the ground and be able to transport it out once you need to get in SPMTs or not SPMTs, but boom lifts to work on engines or this this BART platform itself. But it's just a fun idea. Anyways, there has pretty much not been anything else going on over here that we've been able to spot yet. This is where they've been storing Starlinks, for instance, for the V2s. And I still think that 24 had like 5 of those inside of it. As just one of those like dummy payloads, because they never said what it was that was inside, because they always have something special for the inaugural flight. Sometimes it's just a block of cheese or a wheel of cheese or something along those lines. But in this case, there wasn't really anything mentioned like that. All it said was payload not applicable as far as its status. So Starlinks that aren't really being deployed wouldn't be a payload. It would just be dead weight that would be useful.
Well, and didn't Elon neither deny nor confirm if there were Starlinks in there? Because I think Ellie asked, or somebody asked in that Twitter Spaces on Sunday night before the 17th, before the initial day of launch.
Yeah, he was acting real coy about a couple of questions, and I think that was kind of one of those that has been asked of SpaceX, or specifically Elon, and he kind of avoids those kinds of questions. I don't know why.
He was he was very strong about making sure he set the right expectations. Like his thing was
Yeah.
more than likely this is going to blow, and nobody like everyone asked questions like, what if it survives? What if it does this? And he wasn't even having the future. It wasn't even a possibility to him that it wasn't going to blow.
Well, yeah, he wanted to set those expectations that this is like the N1, and in a lot of ways, it actually was. So, at the highest point that the N1 ever made it was very similar to what Starship is. So, it's like Starship is the ancestor in that sense as the N1. It has a full flow stage combustion engine, which on one side is LOX rich for the turbopump, and that's something the Russians developed and were very successful at, and the U.S. was really good at the basically fuel-rich systems. And so you basically have this marriage of the two, and now you have this beautiful vehicle that it's more efficient and it has everything that you could possibly need for an engine. It's just going to be a little bit more until it's completely well understood, because they're always going through and trying to figure out like the startup sequence to get that just right so that you have a better outcome for the engine, because that's usually the area where you're going to have a breakdown is more likely at the startup or shut down technically, but it's startup then shut down, and in between you can still have problems, but it's not nearly as bad as the startup. I'm just seeing if there's anything else along the area that's changed. I'm actually kind of looking at these, and either they got some more new ones in, or they've been removing some in a weird way. But these are spools of wire, so they've been going through and connecting everything electrically in the village and the Sanchez and the build site. So I'm not expecting to see these last too long, but so far they're still there. All right. Well, I think now we should be able to jump over to the build site, and I see one that is going to be the best topic to talk about. And I do think we actually have Jax with us now. Are you able to join us here today, Jax?
Hey, everybody. How are you?
Ooh, we traded a Zach for a Jax.
It's amazing.
I like
Fucking
it.
a note.
Welcome, Jax.
Yeah. What a week it's been.
Right? I'm exhausted and I didn't even launch.
Yeah, I'm exhausted too, but it's been trying to keep up with everything that's been going on. It's fantastic, hasn't it been, Jax?
Yeah, I mean, it's been action-packed, to say the least. But yeah, there's a lot to talk about, and I know you've gone through a lot with the launch site already, and some good coverage there.
Yeah, we went backwards today because Zach was headed out, and we knew that ahead of time. And I'm like, oh, good, we can change things up, and this is a good time to do it.
And luckily, we've had a lot of people, come in and watch. We've had almost 3,000 views, so that's amazing. And if you guys are liking what you hear, we do encourage you to hit that like button, hit subscribe to make sure that you get notified when we have our shows, and then the bell icon. That actually makes sure that you are notified. Jaxie, go ahead.
So, I guess it's important to say here, like, obviously, SpaceX flew their first flight test this week, and in terms of the production site, in terms of the vehicles, the next steps for the program, there's a big question mark right now, at least for us, because SpaceX is producing about 17 vehicles right now, at least. So,
17 total right now at this moment.
Probably roughly-ish.
Boosters and starships?
Yeah. I think that's just off the top of my head, but I might be a little bit high. But in terms of what's going to fly and what isn't, that depending on what they learn from this flight, SpaceX knows how to modify vehicles. They've made it very clear that they can modify vehicles. Booster 7 was an excellent example of that because, well, Booster 7 went through an awful lot. Like, over a year ago now, its downcomer imploded during a cryo test, and they repaired that like it was nothing.
Has it been over a year?
April 14th, 2022.
Wow.
Yeah. So we're probably going to see some modifications made to the vehicles based upon what they learned. Booster 7, I mean, they made it pretty well into the first stage flight. So in terms of Booster 9, Booster 10, Booster 11, those are pretty well into production by now. So there might be some retrofits. And that's an open question.
That was Booster 7, by the way. Its downcomer imploded.
Yes. In terms of the ships, we know that Ship 25 has been retired from both Elon Musk and the FAA, which have stated that the second and third flights will be in a configuration in which they cannot survive reentry. And Elon had mentioned Booster 9 and Ship 26 going together in his recent Twitter space. So I think the question for that is, depending on the delay or not that they see, maybe there's going to be some more vehicles retired, maybe there won't be. SpaceX has never been one to stray away from doing that. Interesting times ahead. I think that's what that's my point.
For sure.
Very interesting indeed, Jax. I'm actually pretty hopeful about some things here. So they are planning on ramping up production, and like we can see that they've got a new building coming in here. It's the same footing dimensions basically as what you would have for the Star Factory, and it looks like it's going to connect to the Star Factory. So I think this would be Star Factory Part A, and this would be Part B. And they have this like whole direction that they're going, and we'll get into this in a little bit, but they continue to plan on production. And you don't just normally say, well, we're ramping up production and how to build these systems, and then go, oh, we can't do that now because we don't have launch infrastructure. I think they're still going to go ahead and build ships and boosters like crazy and need a place to store them. Honestly, that's going to be the real question, is where are you going to go through and store them? And that's probably not going to be enough here. But maybe at Massey's, they might have some room there. And I'll just briefly bring up Massey's in this location right here. Would be my best bet of where they would basically store large boosters and starships and do all sorts of crazy things. But in the general sense, I'm really hopeful that they are continuing that ramp up of production, and they will basically go through and start up the second integration tower and second orbital launch mount in tandem as they go through and repair and replace parts of the current launch pad and infrastructure there. So
yeah,
it's gonna be big.
Yeah, it's going to be pretty exciting to see. And you had mentioned Massey's, like they're not slowing down. It's been 3 days since Booster 7 and Ship 24 flew, and they're getting ready to send Ship 27 to the Massey's site. It looks like probably within the next few days.
Wow.
So it was moving around in the high bay yesterday. So it's just, they're not slowing down, or at least not yet. And I do think right now would be maybe not a bad time to expand the infrastructure, like we'd kind of been saying. But I mean, you look at something like Ship 20 and compare it to something like Ship 28. Even without that flight testing, just by ironing out issues in production, running out simulations, the quality of the vehicle has improved so much. And by building the ships as fast as they do, they're able to do that. The iterative design approach that they go with allows them to tweak and adjust things the way they always do. Ship 20 looks like garbage compared to these new ships, just in terms of build quality. And well, while it obviously wasn't garbage, you sort of get what I'm insinuating.
Well, like when you compare it to the previous stuff, it is the quote garbage in that sense. So looking at Mark 1, that thing compared to any of these modern versions of Starship was garbage. It was a great test bed, in order to understand the technology, the process, to understand exactly what you needed for infrastructure. They learned very rapidly of what was required, because one thing that they're doing differently, so normal aerospace industry would say, we're going to go ahead and build this massive complex long before we even touch the first part. And SpaceX went the exact opposite way. Of, well, what do we actually need to build these parts? Can we do it out in the open? Because if we enclose this entire complex here with a massive building or buildings that are all connected together so that it's all like protected against wind and dust, and you can control the environment to the nth degree and has white floors everywhere, that would be a disaster in a sense to think about. Like, you're going to build a $1 billion building just to do the construction inside of, and you still might not have the right tools and facilities necessary. So they're going the exact opposite approach. They're building their infrastructure around their production process.
Yeah, and that's sort of how they've operated for years now at this point, like you had been saying. And we're seeing this new mega bay go up, and we're seeing the Star Factory expand, and everything's suggesting that slowing down, like stopping, isn't on the table for them. And maybe that's going to mean we're going to see more vehicles scrapped, like Ship 22 was or Ship 21 was. But it's part of the process. They've proven time and time again that even if a vehicle doesn't fly, that doesn't mean it was worthless. It provided a load of production data, a load of practice, a load of information about producing these vehicles, especially in a time where they're still modifying their build processes. I mean, Ship 28, their brand new Starship, introduced multiple new processes in order to build it more efficiently.
They stacked it, right, with basically a double stack. They brought in the cone and a barrel section below it, or something along those lines, to do the barrel section and then the cone right afterwards. It was insane.
Yeah, they went straight top to bottom all in one run. And I'd imagine once they have more room in the bay, we're going to see that happen with Ship 29 as well. Ship 29 should be, as far as I'm aware, it should be ready to go for stacking. So we're just kind of waiting and to see. You can see Ship 29's nose cone in that shot right there, all tiled up and flapped and everything. It's beautiful. And that's another thing, is this first test flight, they didn't make it into second stage flight, which I think, as much as this flight was successful, that was a bit disappointing on their part. The lack of heat shield data in terms of a thing this size, especially with the flap areas, which Elon has said are one of their concerns. It's not bad, but I mean, it's one of the things you wish you would have gotten, like, especially because the next couple of flights are going to be 26 and 27 as of now, which don't have heat shields.
And it kind of makes sense in another way to do 26 and 27. Like we saw with 24, that there might be some other aerodynamic issues at play, especially when it comes to engine control authority. If you don't have enough of it, your aerodynamics are going to be all over the place. But it's structurally, like, that was the thing that I was most impressed with the flight, honestly, was how well that ship and booster were able to just keep charging on, despite it just losing all of its speed and acceleration. It was just slamming into the atmosphere in different directions. It was still thin atmosphere, but it was thick enough that your flaps and everything else were being well tested.
Seriously, that was hilarious. Like, I mean, I was confident that they were confident it was going to work, but even I still had my questions. Like, just seeing it do the tumbling and the flips midair was crazy, because it really just did it. And I mean, when they did hit max Q during the flight, whether that was it probably wasn't the max Q that they were wanting to hit with all 33 engines running at 90% thrust, but it still withstood some pretty high pressure. So that's that's a good thing. And their structural testing methodology is unorthodox, to say the least, but it works. I think this flight was proof of that. Like, it's not, it's completely different compared to what other people do, but it works. I mean, they built so many test articles over the past 2 years that everything was pretty much verified. And I think the one thing that they really have left to verify is going to be that Pez dispenser door debuting on ship 27. But they have time, assuming ship 26 is still due to fly on the second flight.
Yeah. I'm so just to kind of reiterate for people who are kind of tuning in and don't know, this is ship 26. It has no flaps, no tiles. This is 20. This is 15. 15 is the one that landed for the first landing for a ship. 20 never did more than just static fires and things like that. But this one might be the first one to go orbital if they don't skip it. That's an approach that they like to do. So they skipped 25. That was the ship that was referred to as at Massey's. And this one is 28, sorry, right here. I'm sorry, 26. Wait, what? 28? Where's 28? Oh, yeah, this is 28. It's got the flaps.
Yeah.
I was like, there's 27 in here as well. It's just barely peeking through the door.
So I had a question on this topic here from Gwenever. Do you think it's likely that B9 will be used like B4 to test out the refurbished tank farm and OLM, and they will choose to fly B10 and S26 instead?
I think that is heavily based on assumptions of what their next move is with the OLM. Because right now, they only just started making their way into the OLM this morning. I don't even know if it was more than a few people. But what the next steps are for the OLM are still very much up in the air. So what the repairs look like in turn are also up in the air.
Well, we know one of the upgrades that Elon has suggested.
Yes, we are going to. I know Elon has mentioned that on Twitter maybe a day or two ago that we're going to be seeing this new floor put under the OLM to prevent that.
Yeah. This was a new one that was released today. I had to go through in super image resolution this one, so you might not have seen this one yet, but it's still just terrible down here. Okay, up here, like this is not terrible. There's some camera lines and things like that were damaged, but really, it's to get back to using the whole plate system that we were talking about here. Like this is what Elon had mentioned that they have been working on these plates, and these were probably all going to be welded together and have water cooling in the inside. And I'm not sure if it's going to be plumbed so that it puts water in between and they have additional spots or how they're going to set this up. But any way that they do this, as long as water is coming through the plates and cooling down the plates and putting water on top of it, that's huge. Like that is the biggest part. There was I still can't remember the guy's name. I think I probably can find it here in just a second. It was Dr. Phil Metzger. He was the one who had talked about working with NASA specifically and his project, the Morpheus launches that they were doing, to understand how to basically do the plates. And they were looking at other plates that were not water cooled, but that's the best approach. He was like, yeah, that's really good because you're taking away the heat. And the question he still had was specifically about like the reverberation of the sound when the engines start. Basically, it bounces down on a flat surfaces and then back up into the engine bells, as well as the constricted flow of the engines, and that's going to be able to mess you up and make your engines basically explode potentially if you do it wrong. Makes them unstable, basically. So yeah. Anyways, the whole idea of using these is still, I think, on the table. But now I think they're going to go say, okay, we're going to do this but we're also going to go through and do X, Y, and Z to this whole system to make it really good. We don't want this to ever happen again, because that's their iterative approach to these designs, is you find the flaw and then you find the fix for the flaw. And this was kind of the fix, but I think they want to find the next flaw beyond this, so to speak, that making the whole thing wider might be prudent as well, and making sure that they have enough water flow so that it reduces the amount of sound energy that's being bounced back up, but you're still going to get plenty of that. It's really going to be immense, complex, and have risks that are still associated with it, but it's going to be much better than what we had with the Fondag. And we were so excited to see this happening. And we thought, well, is this going to happen before the first test flight? And then things got closer and closer. And we're like, nope, it's going to happen after the first test flight. And that was the mistake. I think that everybody didn't realize that the Fondag would not be able to survive. We thought it would be broken in places, but this is really what was necessary to prevent what happened with basically that.
Yeah, and I mean, as long as it doesn't happen again, like as long as something like this doesn't happen again, I think that's okay, because it really does raise the question of how would this flight have gone if this didn't happen?
Amazingly.
And well, we can't necessarily say that. It's the what if thing. It could have been, sure, maybe it would have happened, but maybe something else completely would have exploded. Or there are just so many open questions, and you'll drive yourself insane going through questions like that. But I'm just hoping we're able to see the second flight test without exploding concrete.
Yeah, I'm still just convinced myself that there's a large possibility, or even a probability, that the FOD issue was a direct correlation to its success.
By FOD, you mean Fondag?
The Fondag being flung into the air, the FOD, that's forward object debris, that gets thrown up there. One thing I thought was like, wait a second, if this had been thrown up onto the table and the hold down clamps in between the hold down clamps, you would have destroyed the vehicle right then and there, because it would have tried to launch and it would have gotten wedged and really bad things happening with the hold down clamp of the 20 arms that you could see out here that were retracting in. And yeah, these all look like they're retracted in just fine. They've got the plates on the outside. But anyways, like I realized these chunks of concrete were flung all over the place, and it would be terrible if it had basically landed on the what is this called? The
BQD?
Booster QD.
Yep.
Yeah. I always thinking it's like barbecue, but anyways, yeah.
Well, it is barbecued now.
Yes, it is but yeah, if it landed on the front of it and got wedged in between and it tried to retract and it didn't, because there's a massive chunk of concrete wedged in between.
So you're saying it's good that they unlatched it at the beginning?
Yeah, but the unlatching is still a debatable question if it means that they had a pin system that unlatched them and then it was just all hydraulics, or if it meant that they just opened up the top of it and just said, okay, well, when you're ready to fly, go ahead and fly. Because one problem is that these do not have the capability, once it's at full thrust of like 1.6 metric tons, it would not be able to survive the top of those from getting sheared, or the booster from really getting sheared, honestly. Anyways, kind of getting back to the whole thing is that I'm really optimistic that the infrastructure could be repaired, that we're going in that right direction, and that we can get back to like regular flights, and that production at the build site over here is probably going to stay pretty strong. I think that's still going to be the case. It's just how many of the ships and boosters get skipped.
Yeah.
Because one of the things you mentioned earlier, Jax, was design changes based off of the testing that we did for the orbital test flight. It's all going to get integrated back into the vehicle as it currently is.
Especially because this was the very first flight of Super Heavy. So there's a lot to learn. You look at something like serial number 8's high altitude flight test. Look at something like serial number 15, the last high altitude flight test. They learned a lot on the way. So we're probably going to see some not insignificant changes to the vehicle if I had to waver a guess. But we're going to wait and see, right? There are already big design changes coming up after Booster 7. Booster 7 and Ship 24 were already incredibly outdated vehicles. With Booster 9, we're looking at like that electric thrust vector control to steer the vehicle to pivot the engines, and we're looking at
this is Booster 9 in the back right. Is that correct?
Yeah, in the back right, we're looking at Booster 9.
Okay.
I think we have some nice ground photos of 9 from yesterday.
I've got one right there, but that's one of the photos. Funny that it's just happened to be right on that one. Let's see. It has to be more to the left in order to get that one. But being electric TVC, that's already a problem that has been solved since Booster 7. And Booster 7 flew, but the problem was already solved because they decided that that the weight of the electric TVC, the hydraulic systems was just too much in comparison to what they were really requiring. I don't see Booster 9. I've got like one that would have been pretty close here.
If you scroll down just a tad, maybe, or is there any more? If you maybe right at the top, I know he had some looking at
Yeah, I just had the very just sliver.
Well, let's talk about Booster 10.
All right, Booster 10.
Basically, pretend it's Booster 9. But
they're twins, right? I mean, what's the difference?
Enough.
What's the difference so far?
Booster 10, I think the only major difference is that it's going to be the first to use one of the new E-Dome as the common bulkhead separating the two tanks.
Oh, wow. Is it?
Yeah. So that's a pretty notable change, at least.
Yes.
And that should theoretically give them more propellant, but it has less flow control of the propellant of the methane going down the downcomer, if that's the case.
Yeah, it's not as sharp of a dome. I think that what most people just need to think about is that they're still in a good position. Like, the program isn't over. It's not game over. They're still going to keep moving and pushing on like they always do. This is just another hurdle to get over. Maybe it's a bit bigger than normal, but I think we should all be confident that they can do it. They've proven time and time again that they have some absolutely incredible engineers and just workers in general.
Yes. Blue collar and so-called white collar. It's the entire team. The people there are really, really, really dedicated and amazing. As you could tell by the cheering that was going on Thursday. I mean, they were excited, and rightfully so.
Yeah.
I mean, here's the funny thing. I'm thinking about how even though Booster 7 didn't make it, as long as it had made it, or at least looking at not even Booster 7, but like Booster 9 and Booster 10 here, they have so much better like control over these vehicles, at least the production and design changes that will be basically brought back into how they will use like electric TVC or gimbaling or anything like that, just to give the booster a better chance. And that's going to be on the software side. It's going to be on the hardware side. It's already happened there technically, but they'll have additional robustness, for instance, is like one direction that Elon likes to, say that it's got robustness upgrades. Well, at least for Booster 7, it did. And they really mattered, and they really did count, like having the ability for those engines to explode and not take out all the rest of the engines all at once. That's a huge benefit, because that's kind of what they were kind of looking like at the beginning. It was just like they weren't going to put covers in them, and then they decided, yes, we're going to do covers.
Yeah, and I mean, with Booster 9 specifically, we're looking at what Elon's described as even more robust shielding that'll contain the explosions even better, because you'd rather prepare and have the shielding rather than not have it. That flight test with Booster 7 would have gone a lot differently without the shielding.
It'd be like what flight test after 30 seconds?
Yeah, I mean, it would have been. I think it would be a fair assumption to say it would have been very different, because as much as the shielding was blowing out as the engines went, but I would rather the shielding blow out than other engines.
Yeah. I do wonder if it still affected the other engines, and that was kind of the cascading failure that we were worried about. But it wasn't nearly as bad as blows up and then everything else immediately blows up after.
Yeah.
That's usually what will happen. We did see a couple of engines that basically one engine went out and it took out the other engine, for instance, and it took out the the hydraulics. And that was like the 30 seconds into flight. That was one issue. It was like, ooh, that's bad. But it's the question again, why did it blow up? And it was an outer Raptor, so more likely to have FOD damage. So still a good chance or a probability that some of that has a root cause back to that FOD issue that I'm still, guessing at, but believe that's a probable cause. Do you want to go through and talk a little bit about some of the aerial shots that we have, Jax? I know we've been kind of going on for a little bit about the different aspects of the Starship program and where it's headed here, because that's the question that is the big one. And I think we've kind of answered that as well as we can without further details. And that basically comes with future information from SpaceX and actually what they do physically. So which nose cone was that back in the mid-bay here?
Yeah, over in the mid-bay. This is a strange one. This is actually Ship 22's nose cone.
The Frankenrocket.
The Frankenrocket, yeah. And it's not entirely clear what they're doing with it. You can see if you zoom in really closely, there's a square hole in the front of it. And I'm not sure what this is about, because they've been stripping parts out of this nose cone, presumably to reuse. That's actually a really cool part about what they've been doing with Ship 22, is that they've been seemingly stripping parts off to put on the new vehicles. Reduce, reuse, recycling.
Yep. You read my mind on that one. I've said it probably so many times as well, but yeah.
But they're taking kind of a strange approach to, it's in the mid-bay with a hole in the front. I wonder if maybe there's something more going on with this, but it's really hard to get a good clear shot of this.
I do kind of wonder if what they're kind of planning on doing with 22's nose cone is like, this probably says no, because that's more like a coupon. Actually, it's a huge coupon if that's the case. But I was wondering if they might be going through and looking at as a test article to put in the nose cone jail, do some testing to extreme levels, for instance, to verify how well it will work in other circumstances. Like, why not reuse, recycle even more?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose they could. I think because it's not the new stretch form nose cone designs, it becomes unlikely. But I mean, they could do a variety of things. If the nose cone isn't the primary focus of the test, they've already verified the nose cone with the 31 test article down at the Massey's test site. Does it really matter what they use? I think if you... no, never mind. I remember... I had a thought earlier and I proved myself wrong. So, but I think if we talk about maybe some of these newer vehicles out in the ring yard, there's a lot to talk about and look at. There's even that thrust dome right there for the booster. There's you can see where the center 13 engines attach on the booster. That's for booster 15. They're working so far ahead on this, and that's because there's still a decent lead time on these vehicles with the amount of work that needs to go into them. But they're
not afraid of retrofits either. So that's a good thing there as well. It's not like it's completely dead. It's just, well, we're not going to use this part much anymore because it's a clone of the current one that we've got. That's where they skip ones.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, Elon has said that they took Booster 7 apart and put it back together so many times because they just kept modifying it and changing it. And just they're not afraid to do that, because if they can not scrap a vehicle, a good vehicle, they won't. Unless they have very, very valid reason to. With Ship 20 and Booster 4, they skipped those because they were outdated with the Raptor 1.5 architecture. It was just time to move on from those. You can see, wow, that's a pretty cool top-down shot.
I know. I was looking for it and found it, because it's like, this is the best one to give you like all of the rings organized in a pretty pattern, I guess you could say. It's not usually this top down. So Mauricio got a really good one on this.
Yeah.
It's also not usually this lined up.
Yeah, true. And like, they're really organized too. They've got each one of these strapped down, and it's just almost art.
Yeah. I mean, these sections are pretty good looking. And one of the things they recently finished up this week that I briefly mentioned last week was that they were commissioning a new turntable in the high bay.
Mm-hmm.
That's been done now.
Wow.
The test article that they were welding with has come out. And actually, in the winds, it collapsed in on itself.
Did it really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Crazy.
We weren't paying attention because we've been so excited about the launch. We
I
didn't
know.
notice a ring collapse in
This
on
week
itself.
has been a blur.
I know, but I've been like paying attention to so many things, but I didn't even hear about that one. So that would be the ring right here that had collapsed in on itself.
Yeah, when they took it out, it looks like they didn't put one of their stiffeners onto it. So,
oopsie.
I'm actually looking to see if they have any stiffeners just sitting around here, and they don't. They should have had a stiffener just ready to pop onto it, and the stiffeners are all being used. So it's like, oh, you don't have your tooling for, keeping your rings in place or something. So yeah, these all have these top rings that will keep it from buckling in the wind or anything else. The 5-ring stacks are typically the worst. What was the height on this one? Was it just 4?
Yeah, I believe it was 4.
Ooh, wow.
But it was sitting on a pretty tall stand, so it was kind of raised and.
Okay.
With that aside, Booster 11 in the Mega Bay is progressing pretty well. The LOX tank has had the raceways and autogenous pipework installed. It recently received its liquid methane downcomer, the transfer tube from the top liquid methane tank, connecting it to the engines. It's just around the right-hand corner of the bay.
Yeah, I'm just looking for it. Let's see if I can get a good view of that. I think it was
the
bottom. This one.
There it is. So,
beautiful.
Yeah, you can see the raceways along the side, and I guess relevant thing. Hey, if you go up to the common dome, you can see the FTS box. Hey. But yeah, they just have so many vehicles, and right now the next thing for Booster 11 will be, in terms of the LOX tank, they'll need to put the aft section onto it with the engine connections and all of that. And I think that's a big question now, because did they learn anything about that engine section during the flight test that they need to modify? I'd say that there's a fair chance that they learned at least something.
Yeah.
And for the methane tank, they still need to stack and assemble the methane tank, get the grid fins on, do that. But if they push hard to get it done, they'll be able to do it fast. It just depends on what their priorities are. Actually, do we have any questions right now?
We have lots of questions, and we have some donations. I'll read the donations real fast, and then Mauricio can take the questions.
Wonderful.
For the donations, we want to thank everybody, first of all. We also want to thank Jacques for donating 11 euros. She says, thank you all. Snorkers donated $5, says, loving that the auto-generated closed caption translate QDs as cuties.
Oh, they're so cute.
I think that's funny. I laugh every time I see it. Rocket donated $9.99 and says, Raptor performance, we lost 6. Debris, poor performance. What's the go, no go margin? By Zach. And then I Am Groot donated $4.99. It says, safe trip back, Zach. Bye. He said it a little differently than that, but he did say that. Those were the words. John Dopker also donated $10 and says, let's get them likes to 2,000, y'all. Mauricio actually asked a question. That's funny. Norman Robinson donated $5 and says, does anyone have an idea what the proposed flame diverter design might look like? Maybe a shaped arrowhead or pyramid cooled internally? I would actually encourage you to go to Twitter and check out Chrome Kiwi's drawing. He did something similar to sketch out what it might look like. And then Mile Hunter, we want to thank you tremendously for donating $49.99. And he asked the question, asking what effect steam locked inside concrete has on the structural integrity. Seems concrete will self-destruct. Is it easier to control steam under the water table? That's a good question. I don't think it's easy to control steam at all, gents.
Yeah, so the concrete itself should have very little water content in the concrete because that's how it cures, but it still can have a little bit in there. But the more problematic one that you're talking about would be underneath that launch table, you do happen to have a lot of water. However, at the depths that you're talking about, the amount of heat that we're talking about, it's not going to be, I think, directly affecting it and turning it into steam and bubbling it into that 999 times its expansion ratio from in volume from liquid to gas. But it is the stuff on the surface that would be vaporized quite readily. It's pretty dry typically after a launch unless the water deluge keeps on going. So to kind of answer it, I really don't think that the steam is as much of a problem on that side. It's just the amount of vibration and the amount of pressure just obliterated that fondag. What was the next question?
I think you answered that question. They were asking if it's easier to control it under the water table.
Okay.
So those are all the donations. Oh, and let me do the PayPal ones. We actually got a $10 donation from Jim Cavett, who says, Sunny Streets. Lyric Bread donated $10 and says, thank you for everything. Drake Smith donated $20 and says, clear weather. So we want to thank you all for your donations. Thank you. Oh, and Mark C. Nemmers donated $19.40 and wrote, it's still. I'm not sure what it still refers to, but we thank you for your donation. And those are all the donations.
All right, well, I'll get to the questions here. Before that, I want to thank everybody that donated and all the viewers, the new viewers. Make sure you hit that notification button so that you can get notified for these streams. We typically do them every Saturday, so just be on the lookout for that. All right, so we got a question here from Finn. Would SpaceX consider prototype S-28 for next flight, and would a catch attempt of booster will be likely on the second flight test? Anybody want to answer that?
Yeah, so could they skip over to 28? Yeah, they definitely could. I think it's a bit early to say right now. It'll definitely become clearer over time, but that's one of the things that is within the realm of possibility for the second flight test. Right now, it does seem like they are sticking with the 26 for the second flight, but I don't know. Getting those Starlinks up and getting the heat shield data would be quite something. Maybe they're just not confident. If they're not confident in the booster and they want a throwaway ship like 26, maybe that could also be why they're pursuing 26. In terms of the second half of that question, will they consider a catch attempt with the super heavy booster on the second flight? I would waver a guess and say probably not, especially because they didn't make it to the water landing on this first flight test. I can't see them doing it.
I think it would take 3 flights that have successfully made it to the water landing at least twice before you'd even consider it.
I think the written reevaluation of the 2022 programmatic environmental assessment, so the environmental assessment that came out last year, They recently released a revision to it, sort of, and they had noted that they were planning for maybe around 3 splashdowns with the booster, and I think that was in the ideal scenario. I personally don't expect the second flight booster to be cut, but who knows?
What do you mean by cut?
Caught.
Oh, caught. Sorry, my apologies.
The other ones could be cut, but that one it's not going to be caught.
I was just confused. Sorry.
Sorry, just throwing a little bit of words in there that was the confusion to add more confusion. But yeah,
which is what we do best.
But yeah, so no booster being caught in that second attempt. We kind of laugh about it now, but about a year ago or more, FCC documents did say we might catch the booster. Nah, they're not. They're not even close quite yet. I mean, the structure of the booster could handle it. We verified that. The accuracy of the booster, however, is still a question, especially with electric TVC. That still needs to be verified as well, but it looks to be better than the hydraulic side. Go ahead, Jax.
No, sorry, I was just agreeing.
Okay. Yeah. There was something I kind of was going to mention earlier, or I briefly mentioned earlier, but I didn't go into, that I actually did want to talk about a little bit. There's a lot of details that I've been going through, and we kind of skipped a lot of things, but this is one that's pretty useful. I've kind of figured out what this part is.
Tell us, Thomas.
So they've been going through and building up this star factory, and it looks like it will continue all the way down to this corner. That's based off of what they're doing here. The pads are larger here than what's on this side, but I kind of expect that this entire structure will be basically continuation of the star factory. They'll probably have a second wall, or at least structurally it'll be a second wall. So it's got vertical, not beams, but what are those called? Columns or pillars that go up and that basically support the roof for this building. But they'll share this wall, and that's something that happens with a lot of these factories. But what we're basically looking at is a press pit, is this particular structure right here. So they've got these pieces of what I call sheet piles, or what are called sheet piles, and then they've reinforced it. So this is one of several steps in order to make a press pit. So what you would probably see is the equivalent of a hydraulic machine to create their own parts, to stamp their own parts, for instance. This is basically what you'd use to do that. It's also used in other industries, but this would be the particular case I would expect. It could be that they also do chemicals, but the thing that we would basically see is once we get the additional flyovers, we'll probably start to see column pieces going in here to say this is where the foundations for this machine will be, that will stamp out parts. And this is probably going to be closer to the corner of the factory. They might still have a bit of room over here. But yeah, that's kind of what I'm expecting so far, is that this would be the press pit for that. And that's going to be kind of interesting because it's vertically integrating their facilities. And one thing that either the soil here is complete crap, that you have to do larger footings, which doesn't kind of make sense. This didn't have such massive footings as these. So I think that they might go for higher capacity bridge cranes. So this has bridge cranes here. I expect this would probably have bridge cranes as well. So you're going to be transporting parts around. But it's kind of just interesting that this is a very specific focus on building this. Like they really think they need this. So I think it's going to be that vertical integration, or it's just supply chain issues where they need to make it themselves.
So when you say that's for stamping the metal, does that mean it does so the machine, one of the machines that I got back in the day was the machine that bends the metal into the circular cone that you see are the barrels, right? They did that for Falcon 9. Is that what you're saying this machine could be?
Yeah, you could do stretch forming or something like that, but the one I'm thinking of more of like is the longitudinal pieces that they have for like at Sanchez, for instance. Those are the stringers. They have a need to make a lot of those. So if they make them themselves, great. Otherwise, they have to rely on aerospace industry to make it for them. So that's kind of the thing that we're looking at is what is it that they make the most of that they might have problems getting from somewhere else? They can get them, but it's going to be cheaper if they do it themselves eventually. And I kind of think that that's what we're doing here. So it's really going to be the interesting part is when you see piles, it means like you'll have rebar or the stuff that is basically auger bits going down to determine where the piles will go. And they won't need to be too terribly large, but you'll probably see something along those lines. And the concrete foundation will actually be separate from these walls. So one thing that Philakid had pointed out is that this is a little bit askew. It doesn't need to be straight on with the rest of the building because this is just the outside of where you would actually build. So where you're actually going to build is going to be inside of this, and there's going to be a gap between about maybe a 1 foot or 2 foot gap or so that people can go through and work, and they'll put in concrete forms and all that stuff. So it's going to be very interesting to see, exactly what the machine would be that goes here. But yeah, there's plenty of stuff to say that they're going to do something all the way to here as far as that building, because this is still within that footprint. And they've got these 9 pads. Should actually be 12 because they should actually go over here as well. And it kind of matches with what they're doing right here. So it'd be on the outside, goes about right here. And the same thing goes about right here for the one that matches up to this, and the same thing up here. Anyways, that was just one I wanted to go into and talk about because it's kind of interesting because it's the production of Starship, and that's huge. The business end being the launch table infrastructure, still that's a choke point, but they're getting a lot better at it as of the test flight, because now they know what they need to fix, what they need to improve and change. So Jax, were there any other things at the build site that you wanted to go over? I saw a ton of things I would love to go over, but I don't think I have time.
You don't. It's now time.
Oh my gosh.
I think we're ready to wrap it up.
Okay.
So before we wrap it up, I just want to say that our friend Thomas has a birthday around this time. He doesn't necessarily like it known when his actual birthday is, or that it's even his birthday, but because I am a rebel, I wanted to tell you all so you could wish Thomas happy birthday. Happy birthday, Thomas.
Why, thank you, Indian Star.
Happy birthday, Thomas.
Thank you, Jax.
Happy birthday, Thomas.
Thank you again, Mauricio.
Anyways.
And now we can wrap it up. There is a question real fast. Terrence is asking, why not build stage 0 over the sea nearby, just past the beach? Let all the seawater take the blast. He's sure that the first stage cannot evaporate the ocean. Thank you for hearing him.
Well, the simple reason corrosion would be the biggest element here to work against. Even stainless steel can be corroded. So you do not want to park your vehicles above the ocean and destroy your infrastructure based off of heat, oxidation, and the corrosion, basically because of the salt that is going to get on it. You can go through and do that eventually once you have figured out what you want for launch infrastructure. So fuel farms, your tanks, all of that. It needs to take place in a way that allows you to understand like a sea launch platform. You really need to get that foundation size down and really well understood.
Makes sense. And thank you for your $10 donation, Terrence. We appreciate you. And with that, you gents want to close it up?
Yeah, I'll start it off. It's been amazing this week. And thank you again for having me go through and share Mauricio's photos. Just a quick note, all of the ground photos are available on Patreon for pretty much every tier. But they are far worth it because I barely scratched the surface on the photos this week, and all photos are available for all the tiers of their same level. Basically years back, I think it was 2012 21 that we started using Patreon for that. And it's just always impressive to go through and look at all these photos over time, especially. So I would recommend getting a Patreon account to go through and do all that. If you'd like to help donate, go through, use PayPal. That's a good way to send money directly to cover all these flights and all the costs associated with it.
And it's
with that-
Patreon or YouTube. You can become a member. And he always gives out the ground photos. And you're always going to get at least 400 photos, both ground and aerial, assuming the weather's good, each week. So it is well worth your subscription. Just adding to what Thomas was saying.
And with that, I'll actually hand it off to Jax. Thank you, Jax, for joining us again today.
Yay,
Yeah,
Jax.
thank you, Thomas. I mean, what an important week it's been for SpaceX, and more so the implications of what this week was. The first flight test of Starship, and it's going to be kicking off. It's going to be kicking off something interesting, to say the least. So, thank you all for having me once again, and I'll see you when I see you.
Mauricio?
Yeah, Jax.
Yes, I want to thank everybody for supporting us and for watching. It helps out a lot. If you can, just give us a like. That helps out tremendously with the algorithm. And also, for the new viewers that are tuning in, we do flyovers every single week. So it's going to be really crucial to capture the repair process from an aero perspective on a weekly basis. So we will be in the air as soon as possible, and we'll try and do them as often as we can. Like we said, we do one flyover a week and ground shots on Friday, typically, to have them for the show. And all Patreons and members get early access to this, and as well as some show intos where we get a first look and analyze the images online on Discord. And that's it for me. Thank you so much for joining us today. It was a great show. Thank you, Thomas, Jax, Indian Star, and Zach that's not here. I'll pass it along to Indian Star.
So with that, we'll end it with main engine cut off, stage separation confirmed. Love you guys. See you next week.